Hey guys, enjoy these new 20 stories. We hope you enjoy them. Let us know your thoughts. And as always, most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please smash that subscribe button and hit that like button too. It's free and does so much for us. We're forever grateful. Now to the stories.
I'll never forget walking into Mile High Lounge that Friday. The place smelled like spilled beer and ambition, the kind of spot where everyone's looking for a story they can brag about later. I was scanning the crowd, adjusting to the dim lights, when I caught her by the jukebox, twirling on her phone. She had this loose confidence about her, shoulders back, head tilted just so, and a loose strand of hair glinting under the neon halo. My heart thumped the way it does when you know something interesting is about to happen. I sidled up and said something about the song that was playing. Can't even remember what it was, and she looked up with a half smile like she'd heard that line before. Her name was Lolly, she said, and she laughed at some of my jokes in a way that made me think she wasn't just being polite. We ended up at a corner table, 2 drinks in front of us, talking about everything from obscure podcasts to the weirdest subway encounters we'd ever seen. There was none of the usual dating showmanship. She didn't ask me about my job or my car. She just listened, and that felt rare. After that night, we matched on the app and texted nonstop. She told me about her sister, Jenna, this unreal blonde with model features who popped up in half her pictures. Lolly said they were inseparable and that Jenna sometimes tagged along when Lolly was hanging out. I figured they were twins or super close buddies. I didn't think much of it until we made plans to meet for tacos by the river one Saturday afternoon. The taco truck was a beat-up trailer parked next to a graffiti-covered wall. We sat on a rickety bench, watching kayakers glide under the old iron bridge. Lolly's eyes sparkled when she bit into her fish taco and said something curious. She sometimes used Jenna's photos on the app instead of hers, just to see how guys reacted. She said Jenna was way hotter, and that she wanted to know if prettier women got better treatment. She called it social science. I laughed it off, thinking it was just a playful experiment. She said some guys coasted when they realized the switch. Others got angry, some kept chatting. I shrugged and teased her about the ethics. She winked, said I passed the vibe check because I'd stuck around. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Was that just part of some weird test? I told myself it didn't matter. She was fun, funny, and I liked spending time with her. A few days later, she invited me back to Mile High Lounge for a live set by a local band that wasn't terrible. This time I dressed sharp, hoping to impress. When I arrived, Lolly was already there, leaning against the stage, whispering into Jenna's ear. Jenna turned and waved at me. They both looked stunning. I waved back, grabbed a beer, and joined them. Lolly introduced me again as her boyfriend. I flashed a grin and nodded at Jenna, who giggled and slipped away to the bar. Lolly and I danced to the music, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her skin. She pressed her hand to my chest, said something I didn't catch over the drums. I leaned in, assuming she was just caught up in the moment. After the set, we wandered outside into the alley lit by a single yellow bulb. She said she had a confession. My heart sank, but I braced myself. She told me the truth. They weren't sisters. Jenna was the mastermind behind the photo swap, and Lolly had gone along because she was curious about who would stick around if they knew her real face. Jenna had started a vlog series called Pretty versus Playing, where she recorded men's reactions when the profile photos changed. Lolly claimed she didn't know how much Jenna was making off it until recently. She blamed Jenna's influence for dragging her into it. I felt bile rise in my throat. I looked at Lolly's eyes, wide and pleading, but I also noticed Jenna's phone screen glowing in her hand behind Lolly's back. She was scrolling through the latest upload, our date at the river, my goofy grin, my compliments recorded as if I were reading a script. My private words, my excitement, my genuine interest, all cut into clips. Comments popping up. Average guy falls for scheme. Watch him choke when he learns the truth. He's just thirsty. I wanted to turn and argue with Jenna. I wanted to yell at Lolly for letting this happen. But instead I asked, as calmly as I could manage, what she wanted from me now. Lolly swallowed hard and said she was sorry. But the video was already getting views. She couldn't take it down without losing Jenna's trust, and she was stuck. Jenna stepped forward, grinning, saying I should be grateful. They were doing important research on dating bias. She said they'd picked their subjects carefully and had passed. She said they'd split the ad revenue. Lolly's chin quivered. I felt like I was floating above my body, watching someone else. I told them to stop with the sales pitch. I asked Lolly if she even liked me or just liked the footage. She turned away, wiping her eyes. I didn't wait for an answer. I said goodnight, left my beer half finished, and walked back through the dark streets, the echo of Jenna's laughter chasing me. Over the next day, I replayed every moment, the taco truck, her laugh, that moment in the alley. I deleted our texts. I deleted the app. I felt violated, like my feelings had been a prop in someone else's show. I couldn't believe I'd let myself trust a perfect stranger so fast. I realized how hungry I must have been for connection to ignore red flags. Maybe I was too easy to impress, too quick to forgive. A week later, I checked their channel. The video was trending. Men were making jokes about me. Some called me gullible, others called me sympathetic. Some even claimed I deserved it. I scrolled through the comments, hating myself for needing to see them, hating Lolly for being part of it, and hating Jenna for enjoying the show. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark, thinking about what I wanted next time. No more headlines, no more experiments. Just one person who wanted me for me, not for ratings. I still pass Mile High Lounge sometimes and catch a glimpse of jukebox light through the windows. I think of Lolly standing there, phone in hand, staging her scenes. I wonder if she ever regrets it, or if she watches those clips and feels proud. As for me, I'm back on the app, but slower, more guarded. I check the faces twice. I ask for video chats. I insist on real meetups. And when I finally find someone who's real, I'll know because she won't need a camera to prove it. I couldn't believe how easy it was to let my guard down that spring. I was fresh off a long breakup, tired of ghosting apps and awkward coffee meetups. So when I stumbled on his profile, it felt like a breath of fresh air. He didn't have a flashy job or a million travel photos. Instead, his bio talked about weekend hikes, homemade pasta, and how much he loved lazy Sundays with a good book. His pictures showed a relaxed guy with a crooked grin, nothing over the top. I swiped right before I even finished reading, and when he messaged me that evening, I felt that spark you read about in cheesy movies. We met for lunch at a tiny cafe on a quiet side street, the kind of place where the barista knows your order by heart. He arrived 15 minutes late, apologizing with a goofy grin and a shrug. I didn't mind. He ordered us 2 avocado toasts and iced lattes, then leaned across the table, eyes worn, and asked about my weekend plans. I told him about a poetry reading I was planning to check out. He said he loved spoken word and wanted to tag along. In that moment, it felt like we were in sync, 2 puzzle pieces that fit without forcing. Over the next 2 weeks, we fell into a rhythm. He came with me to that poetry night, clapping the loudest when the poet hit the final line. We wandered through art galleries on slow Sunday afternoons and shared a bottle of wine at my place while I tried to teach him how to make a proper pesto sauce. He laughed when I nearly poured salt instead of sugar in my tiramisu experiment. I told my friends I met someone kind, someone who actually listened. I thought I was lucky to have found him. Then came the message. I was scrolling through my phone during my lunch break when a new chat popped up from an unknown number. The profile picture was of a woman's hand holding a wedding ring box. Her text read, "Tell me every woman you've been seeing. I know you're hiding messages." My heart stumbled. I stared at the screen, wondering if this was a prank or some wrong number. But the pacing of her words, the confidence behind them, felt too real for a joke. I stared at my list of conversations with him. No secret threads, nothing suspicious. I typed back, "Who is this?" Within seconds, she replied, "His wife. I've been tracking his phone for 2 weeks." That one sentence felt like a punch to the gut. I put the phone down, pressed my palms against my eyes, and tried to steady my breathing. 2 weeks? Tracking his phone. I felt like a character in one of those true crime podcasts I pretended to hate. I swallowed hard, blinking against the sudden rush of heat in my cheeks. When I finally lifted my head, I texted her back cautiously. I didn't know what to say. She told me she loved her husband, that she noticed odd patterns, late night calls, disappearing notifications, and decided to see who he was talking to. Apparently, I was just one of the names that popped up under recent chats. I felt sick, unsure whether to delete our entire conversation or confront him first. I decided on the latter. That evening, I met him at the same cafe where we had lunch on our first date. The sky was a deep bruised purple as the sun dipped below the rooftops. He waved me over to a window table, smiling like nothing was wrong. I sat down, my fingers wrapped tight around my purse strap, and blurted out, "Why is your wife texting me?" For a moment he froze, mouth open as if caught mid-lie. Then he sighed, ran his hand through his hair, and said, "I should have told you. I'm not single." My chest tightened. The table felt too small, like it was closing in on me. He explained that they'd been having issues, that she was battling anxiety and needed constant reassurance. He claimed he'd told me he was single to avoid drama, to keep things simple. But every time I asked for clarity, asked why he didn't just tell me the truth, he dodged the question, blaming her obsessive tracking, saying she was controlling. He said he cared about me, that he liked how real things felt between us. I felt torn between anger and pity. After he left, I wandered home under the street lamps, replaying his words. The idea of him lying felt almost secondary to the fact that someone, his wife, had been monitoring us. I kept imagining her sitting in her living room, phone in hand, watching my every message to him. The thought of being a clandestine affair in someone else's marriage felt twisted. The next day I messaged her back, asking if she wanted more details, dates, locations, times. She told me she already knew everything and just wanted confirmation that he'd been meeting other women. I sent her screenshots of our texts, our coffee dates, of the afternoon spent laughing over bad cartoons. Her replies were curt. "Thank you." I watched the chat fade into silence. I never confronted him again. Instead, I deleted his number, cleared our chat history, and uninstalled the dating app. I kept thinking about the smirk he'd given when he confessed, the way he tried to shift blame onto her. I realized I didn't just feel betrayed by him. I felt violated by the whole situation. It made me question how much control we really have over our own lives when our phones can betray us. Weeks later, I ran into a mutual friend at a local bookstore. She mentioned he and his wife were in couples therapy now. She said I shouldn't feel bad, that I was the innocent party, but I couldn't help feeling like collateral damage. I kept wondering if she'd ever forgive me, if she viewed me as part of his infidelity, though I wasn't aware of it in the moment. That spring taught me a harsh lesson about trust and privacy. I thought I was ready to open my heart, but it turned out I was just an unwitting actor in someone else's marital drama. Now, when I meet someone new, I ask straight up, "Are you seeing anyone?" And if they hesitate, I take that as my cue to walk away. I've learned that honesty matters more than chemistry, because without it, there's nothing left. I still remember the buzz in my phone when Lydia texted me that first Saturday afternoon. I was lounging on my couch in my favorite hoodie, half watching reruns of some old sitcom, when her name lit up the screen. She asked if I wanted to grab coffee at that new spot by the art museum. I shot back assured before I even thought about it, and 30 minutes later I was standing in line at Java and Canvas, trying not to look like I was sweating. When she walked in, she had that bright smile that makes you suddenly aware of every fluorescent light in the room. She waved at me from a corner table under a giant abstract painting, then caught my eye and mouthed, "Your lattes on me." I felt I had won a prize. We spent that first date talking about everything except the usual first date topics. She told me her favorite movies were the ones nobody else gets, the ones that feel like secrets. I told her about my terrible attempt at learning guitar. She laughed when I said I still couldn't play Wonderwall after a year of YouTube tutorials. By the time the barista called her name for our second round, it felt like we'd known each other for years. I walked her to the door afterward, half expecting her to hug me. Instead, she slipped a folded slip of paper into my hand, winked, and said, "Check this out later." Then she walked away, the wind catching her hair just so. I unfolded it later to find a link to her podcast with a single line, "Rate your dates, rate your life." I blinked at my screen. A podcast? I'd never listened to one of hers. She'd mentioned it in passing once, saying it was just a little side project, nothing serious. I figured it was a collection of chatty episodes about self-improvement or the latest celebrity gossip. I bookmarked it and decided I'd listen when I got home. We went on date number 2 at her place the following Friday. She told me she'd been experimenting with homemade ramen of all things, so I brought a bottle of wine and my appetite. Her kitchen was quirky, mismatched mugs lined a shelf, and an old record player in the corner spun lo-fi tunes. She put on an apron that said "Master of Noodles" and got to work. We chopped veggies, toasted sesame seeds, and drank wine from those mugs. At one point she tasted the broth, frowned, and dumped half a cup of soy sauce in without missing a beat. It smelled amazing. We sat on her floor with bowls in our laps, swapping slurps and stories. I felt like I was in some indie movie scene, all warm light and noodle steam. When I left, she pressed a kiss to my cheek and said, "I'll send you the podcast link again in case you lost it." That night, I pulled out her old slip of paper, found the link, and hit play while I scrolled mindlessly at my phone. The intro voice was hers, calm but lively, welcoming listeners to date rating diaries. The thing sounded harmless. Then I heard the episode title, Week 12, New Guy Impressions, and realized it must be about me. My heart skipped. I considered shutting it off, but curiosity won. The host's voice, hers listed bullets, income range, apartment size, kissing performance. I paused the playback and stared at my ceiling. She was rating me? On my apartment. By kisses. I dove back in. She talked about meeting some guy at Java and Canvas who brought her coffee without complaining about her podcast obsession. Nice points, she said, giving him a solid 7 for conversation skills. Then she mentioned cooking Ren and complimented his hair and gave his kissing performance a 6 out of 10 because he'd been tentative. My stomach flipped. A 6, I thought that kiss by her door was perfect. I checked the episode notes, timestamps. She'd clipped audio from our texts, her own voice notes, and even a snippet of background noise from her kitchen. There was a disclaimer. All subjects are anonymized, voices slightly altered for privacy. I could faintly hear a muffled version of my laugh. She recorded me. I rewound, heart pounding, and listened to episode 7, where she mapped out my monthly income bracket based on hints I'd dropped on my freelance gigs. She guessed mid-3000s, then was shocked to learn I was lower. She blogged about it for advertisers, she said. Can't have listeners thinking all daters make bank. I closed the app, feeling like someone had rifled through my pockets and posted the contents online. The next morning, I messaged her. Hey, saw the podcast. She replied almost instantly. Oh God, sorry. I forgot to take that one down. I stared at my screen. You forgot, I asked. I promised I'd delete it before you heard. She said she'd been swamped with other eps. I'll remove it today, she insisted. I tried to be calm. She was someone I liked, but part of me was furious. She was exposing private moments for ratings, treating me like data points in some ridiculous experiment. Date 3 was supposed to be a trip to that annual street art fair downtown. I hesitated but figured I'd give her a chance. She met me by the biggest mural, wearing a bright green bomber jacket that clashed beautifully with the graffiti behind her. The fair was packed, music blaring, food trucks lined up, artists spray painting live. She led me through crowds, stopping at a booth where a painter turned foams into mini portraits. She had mine done in charcoal strokes, then pinned it on a board for everyone to see. I felt like a sideshow. She clapped excitedly and announced, "Perfect for next week's episode." I forced a grin. That evening, she invited me to help her write show notes in her tiny home studio. Basically a desk, a microphone, and walls plastered with post-it notes. She played me the raw audio, my voice talking about my love for old comic books, me telling her I was still saving up for a car. Then she displayed the spreadsheet where she rated me. Income 4/10, operative size 5/10, kissing 6/10 again. I wanted to scream. She looked at the screen, eyes apologetic. This is how I keep track, she said. I'm thinking of adding a chemistry column next. I felt my chest tighten. Chemistry wasn't something you measured in numbers. I sat there in her cluttered room, flashlight from my phone tapping across her note-covered walls, and realized I wasn't a person to her. I was content for her listeners, a case study on why first impressions matter. I stood up and said, I'm out. She looked shocked. Just go, she said softly. I grabbed my jacket, felt tears prick my eyes even though I refused to cry, and walked out into the dark street. Later, I deleted her number. I even installed the podcast app. When I saw her episode still up, I unsubscribed. I felt empty, like spending 3 dates being measured had sucked the joy out of it. I kept replaying that moment at the fair, standing under her favorite mural, and realizing her excitement wasn't for me, it was for the next download. A week later, I ran into a friend who asked if I'd met anyone new. I said, yeah, I'd met a fantastic podcast producer. He raised an eyebrow. Podcast producer. I laughed and said I'd survived 3 glorious yet humiliating episodes. He gave me that look like I'd been to some weird performance art show. I shrugged. Lesson learned, I said. Next time I'll check the rating sheet first. Now when I think about that spring, it's not about the lats or ramen or murals. It's about the moment I realized that someone's idea of fun can completely erase your own sense of self. I don't mind being rated by friends or family, but I draw the line at strangers telling my worth. So now I watch for it. Signs that someone treats real connection like a scoreboard. If I see a chart, I'm out. I'd never thought a free appetizer could feel like a trap. It started on a Wednesday evening when Rhea texted me out of the blue, "Want to check out that new rooftop lounge? Drinks are on me." I was halfway through my shift at the bookstore, shelving crime thrillers and pretending I knew all the best plot twists. Her invitation felt like a lucky break, so I wrapped up early and met her at Neon Sky, that place with glowing bar stools and a DJ spinning synthwave tracks. I didn't know then that every moment after would cost me more than I bargained for. The lounge was packed, neon reflections dancing off the mirrored ceiling. Rhea greeted me with a hug so warm I almost melted into her jacket. She ordered us 2 signature cocktails, blue liquids rimmed with sugar crystals, and we toasted to random adventures. I felt that flutter in my chest you get when someone's smile lights up a room. We settled into a corner booth, music pulsing around us like a heartbeat. I talked about my dream of writing a novel. She nodded, eyes shining like she really cared. Over the next few weeks, Rhea and I hit every notable spot in town. There was the immersive art exhibit with glow-in-the-dark sculptures, the rooftop cinema playing old black and white thrillers, the underground speakeasy hidden behind a rotating bookshelf. Everywhere we went, she breezed past the host, shooting a quick influencer mode look over her shoulder, and they waved us right in. I tagged the lounge in my story. She'd explain with a shrug and a grin. And every time, I'd marvel at her charm and figure this influencer world was just a perk of dating someone trendy. One afternoon, she invited me to a vegan cooking class downtown. The studio smelled like fresh basil and turmeric. She introduced me to the chef as her +1, and they showed us to a marble counter stacked with colorful veggies and spices. I had to admit, cooking lotus root and kelp noodles with her was fun. At one point, she ditched her apron to film me stirring a pot, then laughed when I playfully flicked tomato paste on her cheek. I thought that was flirty banter. Turns out it was good content. Next was a spa day at Cloud9 Wellness, the place with the salt rooms and infrared saunas. Rhea had booked us a date retreat package and pretended to shush me when I joked about bubbles in my cucumber water. I felt special getting that treatment, like someone had pressed VIP on our afternoon. After silica mud masks and eucalyptus steam, she slipped me a chocolate protein smoothie and told me she'd love a quick video of testimonial. I laughed and said absolutely not, but she pressed her phone in my hand, all sweetness. "Come on, it's just a minute." I gave in. Who was I to deny her for asking so nicely? I rambled about the sonic heat and how zen it made me feel, hands waving around. As soon as we were back in her apartment, she uploaded it. I didn't think much of it until 3 days later, when I noticed a sharp spike in her likes and follows. She shrugged it off. The spa loved it. He'd me a complimentary month's membership. I blinked and asked if I got a free month too. She laughed and changed the subject to my day at work. It wasn't until her birthday dinner that I felt the first pinch of doubt. She booked a private karaoke room at Melody Bar, insisted it was a treat for both of us. We sang duets, her voice low and smoky on Dreams, mine cracking my way through Don't Stop Believin'. The staff slipped in a platter of desserts on the house after her big finish on Bohemian Rhapsody. I congratulated her on her amazing vocals. She said, "I told them I was celebrating you too." I grinned, bought the champagne toast, and we clinked glasses. Fun night, right? Then the surprise came. A week later, I was scrolling through her Instagram and saw a post tagged Dating Sugar Daddy Challenge. It was a carousel of photos from our outings, me stirring broth in the cooking studio, me laughing under the neon lights, me in mud mask green from the spa. The caption bragged about scoring free experiences with some knave guy, with a cheeky hashtag sugar date. I stared at the screen as her smiling face stared back, praising her ultimate social experiment. My chest hurt. Experiment? Challenge. Where did I fit into this? I confronted her that evening over coffee at my place. I told her how hurt I felt being reduced to content for her online game. She looked surprised, like she hadn't thought about the people behind the posts. She apologized but said she didn't think any harm was done. "I give credit, don't I?" She pointed at the tags. I told her tags weren't compensation for feelings. The more I spoke, the more I realized she'd been baiting me with lavish treats while she collected likes and followers. It felt like every moment with her had been premeditated. She promised to take the post down, said she'd been carried away by the numbers. But when I checked that night, the post was still up, now with comments making fun of me, calling me rich daddy and freeloader. I told her to remove it or I was done. She hesitated, fingers hovering over her phone screen, like she was weighing her engagement metrics against our relationship. I watched her choose. She didn't delete it, she muted me. I spent the next few days in a daze scrolling through memories of our dates. The sushi bar where we shared sake bombs, the hiking trail where she held my hand to steady me on the steep path, the bookstore where she let me pick her out a bedtime story. All of it, I realized, had been colored by her social feeds. I felt like I'd been living a photo shoot instead of genuine moments. My trust was gone. I had ended it with a text, "I don't want to be your challenge or experiment anymore. Take down the post or we're finished." She replied hours later with a sigh emoji and fine. The post stayed. I blocked her. Then I uninstalled Instagram for a week, forcing myself to look beyond the highlights real other people create. It felt freeing, like I dropped a heavy backpack full of filters and hashtags. A month later, I ran into a mutual friend who asked if I heard from Ree. I said no, that our story ended. They warned me she'd vowed never to date without freebies again. I felt a strange mix of relief and pity. Sad for her if she really couldn't find a moment that wasn't a transaction. And for me, I learned to be wary of free perks tied to someone's content. Now, when someone offers to cover everything, I smile and say, "That's nice, but I got this," because I'd rather pay my share for a real connection than be a footnote in someone else's challenge. I still get chills thinking about the night I walked up the driveway to Dav's place. It was early autumn, leaves crunching underfoot, air carrying that faint promise of winter. His bungalow sat back from the street, lights glowing behind lace curtains. I had agreed to a casual dinner after weeks of texting about everything under the sun, favorite pizza toppings, childhood Halloween disasters, our shared obsession with old sci-fi flicks. I thought I knew him. Turns out I didn't know anything. When I rang the doorbell, the hallway smelled like fresh basil and something sweet baking in the oven. Dav greeted me with a wide grin and a shrug, acting like inviting someone over wasn't a big deal. Even though I'd never been to his house before, he led me into the dining room where a wooden table was set with mismatched china and heavy crystal glasses. Sunlight filtered through a stained glass lamp, painting colored patches on the tablecloth. Everything felt intentional, like a scene someone picked apart on Pinterest and recreated just so. He showed me around the little living room first, the bookshelves crammed with paperbacks, framed movie posters lining the walls, and an upright piano in the corner. I admired a battered copy of my favorite old novel and said so, and he told me it used to belong to his grandmother. He gathered a loaf of olive bread from the kitchen counter and sliced it with care while I admired the vintage record player spinning softly in the background. His family photos sat nearby. Him as a kid covered in mud after Pawnee Camp, him at graduation wearing a goofy grin, him on a ski trip wrapped in so many scarves you could hardly see his face. We moved into the dining room just as his mom swept in. She was dressed casually in a floral blouse and jeans, hair pulled back in a loose bun. She gave him a quick peck on the cheek and said something in a tone that sounded proud and tender. Then she turned and looked at me, eyes bright, and called me her future daughter-in-law. It was that simple. I sank into my chair so fast I worried I'd crack the wood. He winked at me like it was an inside joke. I blinked twice, heart thumping. Dinner unfolded like a warm haze. His mom had prepared a roast chicken with lemon and herbs, roasted root vegetables, and homemade pasta swimming in a light garlic sauce. We ate while Dab told me about his mom's famous family recipes, how she learned cooking from her own mother, and how food brought everyone together. His mom chimed in with easy laughter as she topped off our glasses with a smooth red wine. I nodded along, smiling, trying to match the tone of sheer domestic bliss. Every time I glanced at Dav, he offered me a reassuring smile, like to say, "It's okay, they already love you." Halfway through the main course, his mom excused herself to fetch dessert. Dav reached across the table, caught my hand, and squeezed. In that moment, I realized I was so completely swept up in the scene I'd forgotten I'd only known him 3 weeks. The thought felt ridiculous, but it also felt right. His family loved him, he cared about me, and here we were sharing a meal that tasted like tradition and trust. I gave his hand a gentle squeeze back and nodded as if to say I felt it too. Dessert was a warm berry cobbler with vanilla ice cream melting at the edges. His mom brought it in on a tray and set it before us with 2 spoons. Then she sat down and, without missing a beat, said a blessing for family, new beginnings, and blessings to come. I closed my eyes and listened to her words, feeling the gravity of the moment sink in. This wasn't just a casual dinner. This was a declaration, an announcement that I was part of their story now. When we finished, his mom slipped into the kitchen to clear plates. Dav leaned back in his chair and said something that made me laugh so hard my sides hurt. For a second, I forgot to breathe. He stood up and gestured toward the living room, and we carried our bowls to settle on the couch in front of the fireplace. The flames crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls. He pulled a small box from his pocket and set it on the coffee table. My pulse sped up. He said it was a gift from me, something he wanted to give before things got too serious. I picked up the box with trembling fingers and lifted the lid. Inside was a matching gold necklace and bracelet set, simple chains with tiny sunburst charms. I stared at it, heart pounding, because gold jewelry was always beyond my budget. It felt like a show of commitment, like he was saying he intended to stay. I looked at him, blinking back tears, feeling more gratitude than I ever felt. He said his mom had given it to him to pass along when he found someone special. He told me he kept it around for months, waiting for the moment when he was sure. I thought about the 3 dinners we had together. Pizza at his place, homemade soup on a rainy night, and this perfect roast chicken thing I'd never forget. I realized I did want to take that step. I was ready to be part of this family, to be that fiancé his mom had announced me as. That's when I noticed his mom standing in the doorway, tears lining her eyelashes. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me, holding me tight. Her cheeks were damp, cheeks pressed against mine, and I felt a rush of warmth at her acceptance. She whispered how happy she was, how she'd prayed for someone good for her son. I hugged her back, feeling the weight of her relief and hope. I heard Dobbs' footsteps behind me. Then his arms enveloped both of us in a family hug that felt like home. Only after we broke apart did I ask how much the gold set was worth. Dav gave me an embarrassed grin and said he wasn't sure, but he thought it was pretty valuable. Later that night, after I was home and replaying everything, I looked up similar sets online and realized that gift probably retailed around $10,000. I sat in my bed, staring at the box on my desk, feeling overwhelmed. It wasn't about the money. It was about the gesture, the symbolism, the fact that I'd been welcomed so fully before any rings or official announcements. The next day, I dropped Dav a text thanking him for the best dinner of my life. He replied with a heart emoji and said his mom couldn't stop talking about me. I realized then that I was in deep enough that I didn't care if things moved fast. I'd been hit by something stronger than infatuation. I felt like I discovered a secret door into a future I'd never dared imagine. I still had that gold set. I wear the necklace when I need a reminder that love can come in most unexpected ways. Through a quiet bungalow in the suburbs, through a mom's open heart, through a man who didn't hesitate to share his family treasures. Sometimes I catch a glimpse of myself in the mirror, sunlight glinting off the sunburst charm, and I remember the crunch of leaves underfoot that night, the smell of herbs and wine, and the simple magic of being introduced as someone's fiancé before I ever had to say the word. It's a story I'll tell again, not because it's perfect, but because it's completely and beautifully my own. I first noticed something was off when I saw my voice coming out of my phone without me hitting record. It was a Thursday morning, and I dragged myself into that tiny speck of a coffee shop on 5th Street, one of those places where the baristas know your order before you step up. I was nursing a matcha latte and scrolling through Instagram when a sponsored post popped up. Top tips for effortless conversation on a first date. The speaker was smiling, leaning forward like they were about to whisper a secret. And the voice shifted, got lower, more familiar. I tapped the screen in disbelief. There I was talking about my weekend hiking trip, calling it probably the coolest span of my life. That was my line. I never agreed to be in an ad. I texted Max right away. Did you post something with my voice on it? He replied almost instantly. What are you talking about? His casual tone felt like a punch in the gut. I asked him to send me the link. 10 seconds later, my phone dinged with a URL. I watched a 2-minute clip of a couple at a mid-century modern apartment. The audio overlay blurred just enough that I sounded like a different person, but not enough to disguise my words. The title read, Date Talk Dissected, Why You Need to Ask About Hobbies. The description said it was part of his new dating mastery course launching next week. I closed my eyes and counted to 10. I met Max at that same coffee shop that evening. The air smelled like toasted oats and sugar, and he was already there scrolling on his phone before I even walked in. He looked up, eyebrows raised, as if surprised to see me. I slid into the seat opposite him, setting my drink down hard enough to rattle the saucer. He cracked a lopsided grin, said, "Hey," like he didn't know what was going on. I asked, voice low, why he used our conversations. He blinked. Conversations? He sounded puzzled. I slapped the video link on the table like a challenge. He watched it, shifting in his chair, gaze flickering to my face and back to the screen. When he finally spoke, he had that teacher in trouble tone. "Oh, that. It's just for the chorus. We'd blur voices so no one can identify you, right?" I shook my head. "My ideas, my expressions, without asking me first." He shrugged. "You said stuff worth sharing." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "You think what I said over coffee is public domain?" He sighed, swiped to another tab, and said he was prepping content, that he had dozens of recordings lined up from dates. "If I can teach people how to talk, they'll pay." I asked if I was a guinea pig. He paused and admitted, "Well, sort of." I thought back to our last 3 dates. Pizza in his loft with that giant wall of vinyl records. A walk through the neon-lit arcade where we tried to beat each other's high scores. And the dim theater where we watched an indie flick and whispered bad dialogue. I remembered pointing out a glitch in the projector, cracking a joke, and him turning on his phone camera to get it. I hadn't realized he was recording our banter for his case studies. I asked why he never mentioned it. He said he thought it was obvious that everything in his apartment was streaming materials. I stared at him, wondering how someone could normalize this without a word. The ride home was a blur of streetlights and my thoughts spinning. I felt exposed, like someone had gone through my journal and broadcast the entries. I imagined strangers pausing the lesson to laugh at my awkward hesitations or take notes on everything I'd said. The idea that my voice could become a tool, a product, made me feel used. I opened my phone and typed a message. "If you don't take it down, I'll go public." As soon as I hit send, guilt prickled my stomach. It felt petty to threaten him, but what else could I do? 2 hours later, Max messaged back, "I'll remove the clip." "Sorry." I stared at those words. I wanted to believe him, but my trust was already fractured. The next morning I checked his site. No date talk dissected episode. Relief flickered, quickly replaced by suspicion. I scrolled further and found a new module, Mastering Flirty Anecdotes. It looked exactly like my voice, blurred just behind the filter, but I couldn't be sure. I closed the tab and deleted my account from his mailing list. If this guy needed real conversations to teach his students, I didn't want to be part of it. That weekend, I bumped into a friend at the record store. I mentioned the whole mess, how Max had used our convos for content. My friend's eyes widened. She said she'd seen one of his ads on TikTok, a guy bragging about real talk techniques, using a voice just like mine. "He's got a whole series," she said, tapping out a link on her phone. I didn't watch it, but her description was enough. I felt hollow, like someone had pried open my chest to harvest my words. I realized I'd fallen for the guy who sold charm as a commodity. I texted Max again. "We need to talk." He suggested coffee. I declined and said I couldn't sit across from him again. He asked if I'd reconsider a proper apology face-to-face. I told him I didn't want to see him. I felt guilty, like I was punishing him, but mostly I felt anger I couldn't shake. I wondered if he saw people as nothing more than content sources, whether he believed our conversations were just fodder for his next lecture. Later that night, I cleared out my phone, deleted the photos of us at the arcade, the screenshot of his loft skyline at sunset, even the text thread where we planned our first date. I installed the dating app that connected us. I wanted to erase the digital footprint of us because I couldn't control how he'd use it. I felt bittersweet letting go of the good memories alongside the bad, but I knew I needed to reclaim my own words. Weeks went by. One afternoon I got a notification. Max had posted a community update on his course platform. He was introducing new guest speakers, couples talking about authentic communication. I stared at the list and saw other voices I recognized from social media. My stomach dropped. He hadn't learned. He was just widening his net. I closed the app and deleted his website from my bookmarks. I realized some people will treat life like a lecture hall, always looking for material, never for real connection. Now, when I open my mouth to speak to someone new, I catch myself pausing, wondering if I sound like a case study. It takes effort to remind myself that my voice is mine, not a lesson plan. I learned to draw boundaries fast. No foam cameras, no recordings, no just for my course excuses. Real conversations happen in the moment, not on someone else's website. And if someone tries to commodify my words, I'll walk away. No apology, no second chance, Because some things aren't meant to be content, they're meant to be real. It was a Thursday afternoon when I slid into the vinyl booth at Hue and Java, the sun shining just enough through the windows to make the place feel like a movie set. I was scrolling through my phone when she arrived, tall, bright red hair pulled into a messy bun, a stack of textbooks tucked under one arm. She gave me that confident smile that makes you believe she's exactly where she's supposed to be. I thought it was too, until she ordered a black coffee and pulled out a notebook labeled Behavioral Science 301. Over the next month, she became my favorite part of every week. Her name was Jane, and she was sarcastic in a way that felt like she was sharing a secret. We met twice a week, rotating between coffee shops, vintage bookstores, and the botanical gardens where she would trail her fingers along ferns and orchids as though she could absorb their stories by touch. She asked about my childhood dog, though I'd lost years ago, and she genuinely seemed to care when I got choked up describing his goofy antics. I felt seen. I told my friend she was brilliant, warm, and maybe a little too curious about everything. Jane's thesis was about emotional manipulation, how subtle cues and strategic disclosures could shape someone's feelings without them noticing. She said it was theoretical, that she was just exploring whether people could be influenced to like someone through calibrated conversations. At first it sounded academic, harmless even. I nodded, told her it sounded fascinating, and figured she was just another overachieving psych major. She'd text me after every encounter, recapping our talks and asking for reflections. How did you feel when I said I lost my dog? Or did my story about the time I hitchhiked actually move you? I liked that she was reflective. It felt like she wanted to understand me. But sometimes her follow-up questions felt heavy, as though she were checking boxes on an invisible chart. I ignored that feeling because I liked the attention and the thoughtful way she dissected our time together. By date 10, I was completely smitten. She invited me to her apartment for homemade pizza. She had that place set up with mood lighting and soft jazz playing in the background. I helped toss dough, she sprinkled basil with ceremony, and we drank wine she'd saved for someone special. I caught myself thinking this was exactly how a perfect date should go. Easy banter, shared tasks, that spark you hear about in rom-coms. Afterwards, she leaned in close and kissed me. It was gentle, deliberate, and yet it made my heart pound like a drum solo. A week later, we had dinner at my place. I cooked spaghetti bolognese from scratch, and when I sneezed in the middle of stirring the sauce, she called me adorable. She said she'd never been in a relationship with a home cook before. I laughed, and she took out her notebook again, scribbled a few lines, and asked me to describe why I felt proud of that moment. I humored her, and she said that insight would be perfect for chapter 3. I felt a twinge of weirdness, but shrugged it off. She was so convincing, so sincere. It was after our third weekend in a row hanging out that I noticed something. I was going through my phone when I found a voice memo from her titled Liking Metrics. Curious, I played it. I heard her voice, precise and calm, describing my reactions. Tone of voice when I talked about my job, eye contact length, how often I touched her hand. It sounded clinical, like a lab report. My chest tightened. I paused at the part where she noted in her soft voice that I'd shown peak affection when she said she felt lonely in her freshman dorm. I shut it off, heart hammering. That night I couldn't sleep. I thought about her laughing at my kitchen sneeze, about her eyes lighting up when I described my dog, about the kiss. Was any of it real? The next day I confronted her at our usual booth, hands wrapped around my coffee cup like it was all the comfort I had. I asked why she was recording me. She blinked, then smiled in that way that makes it hard to stay mad. She told me her project deadline was looming, that she needed genuine data on how men respond to emotional cues. She said I fit her criteria perfectly. Mid-20s, interested in psychology, into honest talk. She sounded like she was apologizing, but her eyes didn't match her words. I asked if any of it had been genuine, our chats, our time together, the kiss. She leaned back and said some of it had, some of it hadn't. She said she felt close to me, but more importantly, she had to collect enough data points to validate her thesis. I felt my stomach drop. She was studying me like a butterfly pinned under glass. I realized every moment that thought was special had been a checkpoint on her project outline. My voice quivered when I asked how much of our connection was just experimental manipulation. She said she calibrated her disclosures to trigger specific emotional responses, that she even scripted parts of our conversations. The panic in my chest was so sudden I could barely breathe. I felt foolish. I had been an actor on stage with no idea the director was calling the shots. She reached for my hand, said she was sorry, that she cared about me in her own way, but she needed this research. I pulled away and said I needed to leave. Walking home that night, I felt the weight of every word I'd said to her, every laugh I'd shared. I wondered how many people she'd done this with, how many unsuspecting dates became subjects in her experiment. The thought that someone could engineer my feelings, piece by piece, left me reeling. I deleted her contact as soon as I got inside my apartment, unwilling to face her follow-up questions she'd surely fire off in the next few days. Friends noticed I was off for a while. I kept replaying our dates in my head, dissecting every moment, wondering if I'd been too gullible. I forced myself back on the dating apps, but I couldn't shake the fear that my genuine self might just be data fodder for someone else's thesis. I started setting clear boundaries, no recordings, no probing questions about why I felt a certain way, just simple conversation. I reminded myself that real connection shouldn't come with a lab coat. A month later, I saw her thesis defense announcement posted in the university hallway. The title read, Emotional Manipulation in Modern Dating, a Controlled Study. I sat through the entire presentation. In the front row, ironically, listening to her detail her methodology, her findings, the graphs of how emotional vulnerability increased report scores. She smiled confidently, thanked her advisor, and closed the laptop. Applause broke out. I watched her stand and field questions about the ethics of her work. She answered calmly as though nothing had ever been wrong. I left that auditorium feeling a strange mix of anger and pity, like I was mourning the version of myself she'd taken and turned into data. But I also felt stronger, like I'd survived being someone's experiment. On the way home, I realized that the world might be full of people ready to test emotional triggers, but there were also people who just wanted to sit in a booth, order coffee, and share stories for no reason other than companionship. Not when I agreed to a date, I checked my instincts, not someone's notebook. I'm careful about labeling conversations or saving every detail. Instead, I focus on the messy, unfiltered parts, the laughter when someone misses a beat, the quiet moments when words aren't necessary. Those are the moments that can't be measured on a thesis chart, the ones worth chasing. And I'll never let anyone turn my heart into a research project again. I still remember fumbling with my phone before that third date, watching the rain blur the streetlights outside the cafe window. I'd been texting Han for a couple weeks. Her sense of humor was sharp. Her stories about teaching art to kids were hilarious, and she'd seemed sweet in every selfie. Our first date was a grab-and-go brunch downtown, where we swapped stories about terrible bosses and favorite cartoons. The second was a picnic in the park, complete with homemade sandwiches and a frisbee malfunction that left me chasing lettuce across the lawn. I thought we were building up to something classic, maybe a kiss by the lake or at least a cozy movie night. When she suggested a dinner at that small bistro tucked into a side alley, I was all in. I showed up early, shaking off the rain on my jacket, my heart doing its usual pre-date jitter. The bistro smelled like garlic and fresh bread. Candles flickered on each table, and I spotted her before she saw me. Hair pinned back with a paint-splattered clip, bright eyes scanning the menu. She waved me over, and for a moment I was sure this was the start of something real. We ordered pasta and red wine, talked about her latest art projects and my plan to finally learn guitar. Between sips, she laughed at my terrible strumming jokes and told me about her dream gallery exhibit. I was gearing up to ask her out again, maybe a hiking trip or a cooking class, when she put down her glass and looked at me seriously. I felt the room narrow around us, the waiter lingering by the doorway. She said, "There's someone I want you to meet." I smiled, thinking she meant a friend or colleague, and nodded. "Right now?" I asked, glancing at the door. She stood, reached across the table, and took my hand. The warmth of her touch made my chest tighten in that good but nervous way. "Come on," she said, voice gentle. She led me through a small curtain at the back of the bistro into a softly lit room I hadn't noticed. I blinked as I saw a small kid with curly hair sprawled on a rug, coloring in a picture book. My brain went fuzzy. Before I could react, Han crouched down and ruffled the kid's hair. "This is Mia," she said, sounding like she was introducing a puppy. Mia looked up, eyed me curiously, then went back to her crayons. Han turned to me and explained, "I thought you should meet her. I want you to see what life might look like if you stick around." Her words landed like bricks. I stood there in a room full of crayons and storybooks, realizing we'd skipped a chapter in the usual dating playbook, one with kids in the title. I sank onto the couch, heart hammering. Mia held up her drawing. a scribbled rainbow with two stick figures. Han said, "Mia drew us." Her eyes flitted to mine, waiting. I tried to smile like I wasn't blindsided, asked Mia what she was drawing. She pointed to the rainbow and whispered, "That's you and Mommy." I felt my throat tighten. Han had said, see what life would be like as her kid's dad, and I had no idea how to respond when I hadn't even kissed her yet. I turned back to Han, looking for a clue. Her smile was soft but fierce, like she'd rehearsed this moment a dozen times. She told me she'd brought Mia along so I'd understand what dating her really meant. No surprises, no hidden baggage. She said other guys had freaked out when they learned she was a single mom, so she wanted to test me. My stomach churned. I asked if it wasn't strange to drop a 5-year-old into a first real conversation. She said, she's great company. I forced a laugh and tried to engage Mia, asking about her favorite cartoons. Mia said Paw Patrol, then turned back to her drawing. The waiter peeked in, eyebrows raised, so Han sent him away with a wave. The echo of her test still rang in my ears. Part of me admired her honesty. Most people hide kids until they feel it's safe. But another part felt used, like a character in her audition for Stepdad. I looked at Mia, coloring with serious focus, and realized I wasn't ready for that role. I realized I barely knew Han outside her mom persona. I hadn't learned her favorite ice cream or her guilty pleasure song yet. How could I make sense of her world when I'd only seen the surface? I glanced at the clock. Dinner time had come and gone. I looked at my half-eaten pasta, then back at Mia's drawing, and said softly, "This is really sweet, Mia." She grinned, showing a gap between her front teeth. I asked her who her favorite person at school was. She said Miss Thompson, then went back to the rainbow. I didn't even get to ask about her best friend or what she wanted to be when she grew up. I realized Han might have done me a favor by speeding things up, but I still felt unprepared. When Han and I finally talked it out, she told me she didn't want to waste time on guys who wouldn't accept her whole life. She said some guys met her for coffee, then disappeared when they heard about Mia. I asked if she really expected me to decide on the spot. She nodded. I looked away, staring at the pattern on the rug. The crayons, the storybooks, the crayons again. It felt like a scene from someone else's life. I didn't know if I belonged. I stood up and apologized for being cold. I told her I cared about her but needed to process everything. She looked hurt but nodded, gathering Mia's sketches and crayons into a bag. Mia scampered over, gave me a quick hug, and said, "Bye, you're nice." I knelt, hugged her back, and whispered, "Stay awesome." I felt the lump in my throat when she ran off and closed the curtain behind us. Outside, the alley was slick with rain. I held Han's hand for a second, felt the warmth I'd felt before, then let go. I said I needed time and space to figure out if I could be more than a date. She said she understood, her eyes glistening, and kissed my cheek. I smiled weakly and walked away, wondering if I just walked out of someone's real life or someone's audition for my love. That night, I sat on my balcony staring at the city lights, thinking about honesty and timing. Meeting Mia so soon was brave, but it also felt like running before you learn to walk together. I realized being part of someone's world meant showing up piece by piece, not all at once. As for Han, maybe I'll text her someday when I'm ready to meet the whole package. But for now, I'll stick to simpler first dates. No kids, no big reveals, just coffee and conversations that don't come with a lifetime commitment attached. When Lincoln's message popped up on my screen, he had this easy confidence in his words. No cheesy pickup lines, just a "Hey, I saw you love jazz and street photography. Want to grab coffee this weekend?" His photos showed a casual smile in a sunlit park, nothing too polished. I swiped right before I even finished reading, and soon we were planning our first meetup at that cozy cafe by the river. On Saturday afternoon, I arrived early, inhaling the smell of fresh pastries and brewing espresso. Lincoln walked in wearing a denim jacket over a white tee, his hair slightly tousled. He waved, then sat across from me, pulling out a camera bag. He told me he was a photographer, worked freelance doing portraits and cityscapes. I asked about his favorite projects. He talked about shooting abandoned buildings at dawn, chasing light across broken windows. His passion was contagious, and I found myself leaning closer as he described the way rays of sun could turn cracked paint into golden highlights. Over the next 2 weeks, we met 3 more times, twice for coffee, once for an impromptu photo walk through a graffiti-covered alley. He showed me how to frame shots, how to look for hidden details most people miss. He snapped my picture against a backdrop of peeling posters and handed me the instant print to keep. I felt seen in a way I hadn't before, like someone was trying to capture who I really was instead of who I had pretended to be. Then, on our fifth date, he suggested we go for a picnic in the park at sunset. I packed some sandwiches and a bottle of lemonade and arrived at the grassy hill just as the golden hour began. He led me to a spot under an old oak tree. The sky was a wash of pink and orange, and he set down a blanket before unpacking a small speaker for soft jazz. We laughed at my terrible playlist choices, sipped lemonade, and talked about favorite movies. When the sun dipped lower, he reached over and brushed a strand of hair behind my ear. I felt my chest tighten. This was everything I'd hoped for. On the ride home, I felt glowing, like the world had been tinted in sepia just for us. But that night, he didn't text me. I shrugged it off and fell asleep thinking maybe he was busy editing photos. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a link to a private Instagram account. The username was something like Forever Young 180, and when I tapped it, I saw photos. My photos, our photos, captioned and tagged like an online portfolio. I scrolled through images of us on the coffee dates, on the photo walk, at the picnic, each with a new filter and a short caption. Handed smile test, color grading experiment, mood lighting practice. I felt my stomach drop. I hadn't agreed to be his subject. I texted him. Hey, saw a link. What's this? A few minutes later, he replied, Oh, that's just my practice account. I experiment with edits using volunteer models. My blood ran cold. Volunteer models? I typed. You never asked me to be a model. His reply came a minute later. Sorry, I thought you'd be okay. I always turn off location and blur identifying details. I remembered the filters. None of them had my face pixelated. They were clearly recognizable. I stared at the screen, feeling my cheeks burn. When we met for coffee that afternoon, I confronted him. He looked uncomfortable, rubbing the back of his neck. He admitted he'd used deepfake software to make himself look younger in those pictures. Had shaved off 15 years, changed some features. He said it helped him attract clients in that competitive market. I felt sick. He lied about his age, about his appearance, and he turned our dates into content. Worst, he'd set filters to pretend he was the age I said I preferred on my profile, which was nearly 15 years younger than he actually was. I asked why he didn't just tell me the truth. He said he couldn't risk being judged by his real age. He thought no one would believe a photographer in his 50s could deliver youthful energy in his work. He said the deepfake was only for the pictures. In person, he was exactly who he said he was. I stared at him, trying to square the guy who'd shown me abandoned warehouses and dawn light with the man who had hidden half his story. We sat in that cafe, the barista's hiss and clink of cups filling the silence between us. I thought about how I'd laugh at his jokes, how I'd trusted him with my favorite coffee order, how I'd let him take my photo without hesitation. I asked him if he'd do it again, use someone's likeness or trust just to boost his following. He hesitated, then promised he'd delete the account, that he'd never use another date in that way. But the damage was done. A few days later, I checked the link again. The account still existed, though the names were scrambled. The photos remained somehow both familiar and off, my smile barely the same, a slight distortion at the corners of my eyes. I felt like I was staring at a stranger. I realized I didn't just feel deceived. I felt erased. Someone had taken our time together and repackaged it into an editing tutorial. I texted Lincoln. I can't continue. He replied quickly, begging for a second chance, offering to prove himself. I didn't respond. Instead, I deleted every photo of us from my phone, cleared our messages, and unfollowed his main account. I felt guilty for the loss of what felt good, but I knew I needed to reclaim my image and my agency. Weeks passed. I went back to the cafe alone, ordered my usual, and read a book instead of waiting for someone to show up. I practiced taking pictures of the street on my own, editing them until they felt like mine. My trust in profiles was shaken. I called people before meeting, asked for honest details, and skipped the superficial swipes. I still love photography, but now I value truth over technique. One morning I walked by the cafe and saw a flyer on the community board. Photography workshop, learn real portrait skills. I peered closer and saw his name. He was teaching under his real age this time, his real face printed clearly on the flyer. I smiled, surprising myself, because I felt proud I could walk past without stopping. I refused to be a background character in someone else's show. That afternoon, I posted my own photo series online, street scenes I captured on rainy days, each labeled with location and weather conditions, no filters, no deceptions. The comments trickled in, appreciating authenticity. Love the raw feel. This is real storytelling. I realized I'd learned something valuable. My image is mine to share, and every snapshot should start with consent. I'll probably never swipe right on a photographer's profile again without being extra cautious. But I'm back on the app, hoping to find someone who sees me for who I am without fancy edits or hidden agendas. Because life's too short to be a deepfake version of yourself. I never thought a friendly dinner could turn into a twisted game, but that's exactly how it felt the night I met Nicole. She invited me to La Petite Brasserie on a Thursday, saying they had the best duck confit in town. When I walked in, the warm candlelight flickered against the exposed brick walls, and there she was, mid-20s, sharp cheekbones, eyes that laughed before her mouth did. We clinked glasses of Pinot Noir and dove right into conversation about our favorite restaurants and dream vacations. I felt like I found someone who spoke my language. Over the next few weeks, we settled into a comfortable rhythm of dinner dates. Tuesdays, Italian trattoria with live accordion. Fridays, sushi bar by the river with paper lanterns. Sundays, taco truck under the highway overpass where the tacos tasted better than any fancy spot. She ordered for both of us, always choosing dishes she swore were life-changing. I trusted her picks, and she never steered me wrong. She laughed at my jokes and remembered details I'd mentioned in passing. My mom's recipe for mac and cheese by high school band's terrible cover of Sweet Home Alabama. The time I got locked inside a public library at midnight. Then came the night she dropped the bombshell. We were halfway through dinner at that cozy ramen joint we both loved. I just told the story about my first solo trip to Europe when she leaned in, lowered her voice, and said, "I have a bet with my ex." I paused mid-sip, eyes wide. She explained that after they broke up, he challenged her to see how many people she could sleep with in a month. I felt my heart sink as I realized I was her latest entry on that scoreboard. She said she agreed to the bet because she was mad at him, wanted to prove she could do whatever she wanted without regrets. She said I was fun, smart, and a perfect candidate for her challenge. I wanted to laugh, tell her she was kidding, but the look in her eyes told me she was deadly serious. My phone felt heavy in my pocket, as though it knew I'd been part of a plot all along. After that dinner, I walked her to the subway station, mind reeling. She brushed a strand of hair off her cheek and smiled as if nothing had changed. I mumbled something about needing time to think, then left without looking back. The next morning, I woke up to a text, a photo of 2 empty ramen bowls, timestamped at 10:47 p.m., with a caption, "One down has to go." I stared at the message, throat tight. I didn't reply. Instead, I replayed our dates in my head. Every laugh, every shared bite, every memory now felt like it had an ulterior motive. I wondered if she'd been counting me since day one, noting my reactions on some invisible spreadsheet. I felt used, like my feelings were collateral damage in her revenge drama. A few days later, I bumped into her at my favorite coffee shop. She waved me over casually, like we were still friends. I ordered my usual cold brew and sat down, trying to steady my voice. She asked how I was, said she missed our Tuesday trattoria nights. I told her I'd been busy. She asked for my week. I said it was full. She looked at me, searching for a crack in my calm, and asked if we could talk. I told her I knew about the bet. She sighed, put her hand on mine, and said she regretted hurting me. She said she wanted to make it up by proving she could have meaningful connections, not just flashy hookups. I raised an eyebrow. How? I asked. She said she'd call off the bet, delete all evidence, and start fresh. No games. I felt a flicker of something. Hope. Before I remembered how she'd viewed me as a point on a scoreboard. I got up, told her I appreciated the apology, but trust once broken was hard to rebuild. She nodded, tears in her eyes, and said she understood. I left without a hug, without a promise to stay in touch. As I stepped outside, the crisp air felt like a fresh start, even though my hands still tingled from hers. Later that day, I checked my phone. No more messages from her. I had installed our favorite ramen app and forced myself to eat leftover pasta in my apartment instead of going back to La Petite Brasserie. I made a solo run to the taco truck under the overpass and ordered my usual 3 tacos, extra cilantro, no judgment. Sitting on the tailgate of my car, I realized I didn't need someone treating dating like a scoreboard. I needed someone playing for keeps. A week after that, I ran into a friend who asked how things were with Nicole. I told him she'd been, let's say, competitive in the worst way. He laughed and said, "At least you're off the list." I grinned, feeling lighter. Later, I walked past La Petite Brasserie and saw two empty tables where we once sat. I thought of the candlelight, the clink of wine glasses, the warmth I'd felt before the bet. I reached into my pocket, held my phone, and deleted her number. Now, when someone invites me out, I ask straight up what they're looking for: fun, friendship, or something more. No games, no bets, just clarity. Because I don't want to be a point in anyone's revenge plot or a marker in someone else's competition. I want genuine. And that's worth more than any life-changing dish or late-night ramen bowl. I still get that pit in my stomach when I think about my first coffee date with Luke. I was late juggling my backpack and a travel mug full of way too strong espresso, and I skidded sideways into the corner table at the grind. He was already there, sleeves rolled up, scrolling on his phone, looking like he owned a leather journal workshop or something. He waved me over with a grin that felt like a page torn from a romance novel. I flopped into the chair, tried to steady my mug without spilling, and told him I was sorry for making him wait. He laughed it off and ordered us two flat whites like we'd been planning this for months. Luke was easy to talk to. He had that knack for drawing you out, like he really wanted to understand the weird little things you kept tucked away. We talked about everything from the weird shapes our coffee foam made to the time I accidentally wore two different sneakers to work. He listened so closely, I felt like he was scribbling notes on my life in an invisible notebook. By the time our cups were empty, I felt I had known him forever. A week later, he asked me out again, this time for a casual lunch at a diner on the edge of town. He said it was his favorite place for pancakes, and he wasn't kidding. They were thick and fluffy, dusted with powdered sugar, drizzled with maple syrup that tasted like nostalgia. As we ate, he asked me about my childhood dreams. When I told him I wanted to be a marine biologist, he said he still collected seashells from beaches he visited. He pulled out a small Ziploc from his pocket and handed me 3 tiny spiral shells. For your collection, he said. I felt that warm glow like I'd just unlocked a secret level in a video game. By date 3, things were feeling serious. We planned a hike up Maple Ridge Trail, and when I showed up at the trailhead, he handed me a reusable water bottle with my name etched into it. It was those little touches, like he'd been listening to everything I said and wanted to make me happy. The hike was beautiful, golden leaves crunching underfoot, cool breeze carrying the scent of pine, and him pointing out a bird's nest tucked in a branch overhead. I was all in, mentally assembling our future road trips and camping weekends. Then I got a text from an unknown number. It read, "Hey, this is Jake from Lakewood Counseling. Luke asked me to sit in on your date today as an observer. Hope that's okay." My heart sank. I stared at the message while Luke whipped up his phone, tapped a reply saying it was fine, and slipped the phone back into his pocket. I forced a smile and asked who Jake was. Luke said Jake was a trusted friend whose insight would help him learn more about people. I wondered what kind of friend needed to hide in the bushes to understand human connection. On the way down the trail, I noticed a guy in a windbreaker standing 10 feet behind us, phone in hand. He hovered by a cluster of rocks, pretending to admire a wildflower. I felt my skin crawl. I asked Luke about his friend. He said Jake was just there to take notes, nothing more. I told him that felt sketchy. He shrugged and said some people learn best by watching. I kept my voice steady but firm. I want to be seen, not studied. After that, I started spotting more friends of his in odd places. At the bookstore where we browsed poetry, at the sushi bar where we shared a spicy tuna roll, even in the parking lot of my gym. Always someone lurking, taking mental notes or snapping photos from a distance. They'd move as soon as I noticed, melting into the crowd. I asked Luke why he needed a whole squad to understand me. He said it wasn't squad, it was a research network. I felt like I was trapped in an anthropological field study. I confronted him over dinner at that pancake diner again, hands fisted under the table. I told him it felt like I was part of a project, not a relationship. Luke looked hurt, like he didn't even see why it was a problem. He said he cared about me, that these observations helped him be a better partner. He pulled out his phone and flipped it toward me. A spreadsheet filled with columns labeled eye contact duration, reaction to surprise questions, and preferred coffee order. My mouth went dry. He charted my every move, my every laugh, my every preference. I felt stripped of my privacy. I shoved back my chair and told him I needed space. He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. I left the diner with my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. I didn't look back. That night, I tossed and turned, replaying everything. Art Lass, the shells, a hike, the spreadsheet. I realized he'd turned my quirks into data points and my comfort into tests. I deleted his number and blocked him on my phone. I felt relief, but also bizarre guilt for walking out. Over the next few weeks, I tried to move on. I went back to the grind for coffee, but the barista asked if I wanted his favorite flat white. I flinched. I avoided the pancake diner, tried a new spot that felt unfamiliar. I told friends about why I coasted him, and they were shocked. Some said I should have given him another chance. One friend laughed and said, "Man, he wanted you to be his lab rat." I nodded, but I still felt tangled up inside, like I'd been in the middle of someone else's experiment. Eventually, I realized I needed to reclaim my space. I started setting rules for myself. No date with more than 2 people around, insist on one-on-one time without distractions, and ask up front if someone planned to bring a buddy. I practiced saying no to hidden agendas. It felt empowering, like I was closing the notebook on his project and writing my old story instead. Months later, I ran into Luke at a mutual friend's party. He looked surprised to see me, phone firmly in his pocket. He asked how I'd been, and I said fine. He apologized again, said he'd learned his lesson about boundaries. I smiled, wished him well, and walked away. Part of me wondered if he purged my data from his spreadsheets, but I knew it didn't matter. I was done being someone's case study. Now when I meet someone new, I watch for the red flags, secret observers, spreadsheets, shadow accounts. I trust my gut when it tells me something's off. And above all, I remind myself that real connection isn't about ticking boxes. It's about unplanned moments, genuine vulnerability, and the freedom to be more than a line on a chart. I might have lost Luke's coffee dates and pancake mornings, but I got my life back. I still remember the buzz in my pocket when Chris weighed in on my latest swipe. His message was casual, coffee this Saturday. And I was halfway through a pizza at my favorite spot, thinking I'd never meet anyone worth a second cheese pull. But his profile had that rare combo, a love of graphic novels and a solid sense of humor. I shot back a sure and figured I'd treat it like any other lazy weekend plan. When Saturday rolled around, I arrived at the hip cafe on 13th Street a few minutes early. The place smelled like warm croissants and ambition. Chris was already there, leaning against the counter with a latte in one hand and a tablet tucked under his arm. He flashed a grin that felt like sunlight through a stained glass window. We grabbed 2 chairs by the window and dove into small talk about our worst job interviews, and the one show we both binged in a single weekend. I felt comfortable, like I could spill my latest rant about the city's broken subway lines without worrying about sounding petty. A week later, we met again at a food truck park that comes alive on Friday nights. He introduced me to spicy Korean tacos and quirky dessert waffles. I told him about my side hustle designing stickers, and he told me about his new startup, which he described as revolutionizing user interfaces for everyday apps. I nodded eagerly, thinking it sounded impressive but vague. He asked follow-up questions, lots of them. What I liked in an app, what drove me nuts, and whether I preferred buttons or swipes. I thought he was just curious because I mentioned I used a dozen different apps daily. By date 3, I felt like we were building something easy. 2 people who got each other's jokes and had decent taste in coffee. We went bowling, and he was competitive but lighthearted, teasing me about my gutter balls while letting me win one round. Afterwards, he pulled out a clipboard from his messenger bag, complete with sheets of paper. I cocked an eyebrow. He said he needed my expert feedback on his app prototype, and could I fill out a short survey. I laughed and said sure, expecting a few checkboxes. The survey had questions like rate onboarding ease on a scale of 1 to 5, describe frustration levels when icon labels disappear, and suggest improvements for notification settings. I paused at the last one before I wrote a paragraph about how app notifications felt like screaming strangers in my pocket. He nodded earnestly, scribbled notes, and asked me to elaborate on my worst experiences. I was halfway through telling him about the rideshare app that once took me on a scenic tour of my own neighborhood when I realized the clipboard looked a lot like market research materials I'd once seen in a university lab. I handed back the clipboard and joked that I'd given full marks for friendliness, but that his prototype needed work. He laughed and agreed, then suggested we head next door to a cocktail lounge for a nightcap. I thought nothing of it, just another twist in our casual dating saga. A few days later, I got a text from an unknown number. It was an email chain titled Date Test Group Responses. My heart sank. The email included my survey answers and screenshots of our conversations, anonymized with my first name and age. Below my responses were feedback from other women he'd dated, similar notes on interface pain points and feature clarity. I stared at the screen, feeling like I'd been slipped into an unsuspecting beta test. I called Chris right away. He answered on the second ring, sounding casual. I asked why he was sharing my private feedback with a broader audience. He said it was confidential research for investors and that all subjects consented when they filled out surveys. I told him I didn't consent to be a test subject for dating experiments. He paused, then said he'd assumed that letting me see the clipboard was consent enough. I felt my stomach drop. He turned me into data without asking. When we met for coffee again, I confronted him. He looked surprised, like he genuinely hadn't realized how it would feel. He apologized, said he was passionate about his work and wanted real perspectives. I said there was a difference between asking for opinions and recruiting dates as focus groups. He nodded, eyes earnest, and promised he'd delete my responses and never use personal dates in his research again. I wanted to believe him, but something had shifted. Over the next few days, I tried to treat it like no big deal. We messaged about meeting up again, about that indie-filled screening coming up. But every time my phone buzzed, I pictured a spreadsheet row with my quirks, and my annoyance level ranked on a chart. I wondered if our inside jokes were actually UX tests. I felt like I was performing instead of simply being myself. A week later, I checked my email again. The date test group responses chain was still active, though my name had been scrubbed. But my words, verbatim, were still there. I texted him, "Is this still going on?" He replied, "Just finishing up the investor deck. I'll archive it." I stared at those words for a long time. Archive, not delete. That evening, I realized I needed to draw a line. I sent him a message, "I don't want to be your market research. Let me know when you've wrapped this up, and maybe we talk again. Until then, I'm out." He replied with a sad face emoji and understood. I deleted our conversation, logged out of the dating app, and tried to move on. The next weekend, I met a friend for brunch and marveled at how peaceful it felt not to glance at my phone every 5 minutes. I realized I'd spent too much time framed as a test subject instead of someone's date. I decided to step back from dating apps entirely and focus on low-pressure meetups, book clubs, hiking groups, improv classes. No clipboards, no surveys, just people. I never got confirmation that Chris had archived his data for good. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I didn't check. Instead, I went to my first pottery class, sculpted a lumpy mug, and laughed when my instructor praised my raw expression. No feedback forms, no investor decks, just clay and genuine messiness. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like the only person in the room. It was a Sunday afternoon, sunlight pouring through the warehouse windows and bouncing off record sleeves in neat rows. I was browsing a crate of old soul classics when she leaned over and pulled out a mint-condition pressing of Otis Redding singing "Try a Little Tenderness." She held it up with a grin like she'd found buried treasure. I couldn't help myself. I complimented her taste, and she laughed that light, genuine laugh that makes you feel like you already know someone. We spent the next hour flipping through records together, swapping stories about the worst albums we owned. Hers was a disco cover band record that played at the worst possible volume. Mine was a novelty Christmas record that skipped every third track. We ended up at the cafe next door, sipping iced matcha lattes and talking about our lives. When I asked if she'd been in love before, she shook her head and said she'd never had anything serious. I believed her. She talked about her love of spontaneous road trips and her dream of moving to a beach town someday. She painted a picture of someone unencumbered and free. Over the next 2 weeks, we texted constantly and met up 3 more times. Our first official date was at an underground poetry slam where she cheered the loudest for the poets who dared to pour their souls out on stage. The second was at a sushi making class. She revealed a hidden talent for rolling perfect maki. For the third, we rented kayaks and paddled along the river at sunset, the sky streaked with orange and pink. She handed me a waterproof speaker playing our favorite songs, laughed when my oar went sideways, and let me win a little race to the dock. I thought I was falling for someone who was open and unattached. Then came the invitation that shifted everything. We were walking through my neighborhood on a Friday evening when she stopped in front of a small craftsman house with twinkling patio lights. She turned to me, eyes dancing, and said, Want to come over for a glass of wine? I've got something fun planned. I hesitated. Something about her excitement felt electric, so I said yes. We stepped through the front gate, past a row of potted lavender, and through the screen door into a cozy living room. I smelled fresh basil and vanilla incense. Make yourself at home, she said, motioning to a couch piled with mismatched pillows. I settled in as she disappeared into the kitchen. A moment later, a man walked in, a tall guy with dark hair and a familiar crooked smile. I'd seen him in a photo on her phone once, but she described him as her cousin. He held up a wine bottle and said hi, pouring 2 glasses. I raised an eyebrow, but the warm glow of the room and the soft laughter in her voice made me nod. We toasted and chatted for a bit. He asked me about my job, and I asked him about the pizza oven in the backyard. Then Olivia cleared her throat and her eyes locked with his. Remember how we said we handle this together, she asked. I frowned, and she gripped my hand. This is Daniel, she said to me. My ex. My head spun. She hadn't mentioned an ex. She said it was complicated, that they'd split a month ago but decided to move back in for convenience. 2 leases ending at the same time. He gave me a tight smile and said, "Nice to meet you." Olivia squeezed my hand and told me not to be weird, that they were cool, that it was no big deal. I forced a smile, let slide. We drank our wine and tried to make small talk. Every time I asked about her place, she deflected with jokes about freeloading roommates. I watched them exchange inside jokes, saw how they finished each other's sentences. It stung, but I tried to believe she'd been honest when she said she wasn't serious with him. As the evening wore on, Olivia suggested we play a game, something she called relationship roleplay. She handed me a stack of index cards with scenarios like first anniversary dinner and meeting the parents. I thought it was whimsical, like a party game. Daniel took the opposite role. He pretended to be my date while Olivia pretended to be his. They swapped names and voices in these skits, asking cheesy questions and offering me cards to play along. At first it was funny, me saying nice to meet your family and him complimenting me on ripped jeans. But soon it felt forced. I couldn't shake the look in Olivia's eyes whenever she saw me laugh at his lines. It felt like she was studying me, noting how I reacted to his compliments. Then she paused the game and said, "Okay, real talk." She pulled me aside into the kitchen and explained how they'd cooked this up to get back at each other. Daniel had taken her on dates to make her ex jealous, and now she was doing the same. She said they were staging a revenge dating experiment on random people to feed their bruised egos. My stomach sank. I felt like a lab rat in a twisted psychology study. I returned to the living room and watched as Daniel and Olivia resumed the game, this time with more aggressive prompts. You're meeting for coffee after a breakup. You're consoling each other after a fight. I couldn't pretend anymore. I stood up and said I needed fresh air. The screen door clicked behind me, leaving the game and their laughter inside. Outside, the porch lights cast long shadows on the lawn. I took a deep breath, trying to sort through the sting of betrayal. I texted her, "Thanks for inviting me. Definitely an experience." I slipped back inside, gave Daniel a quick nod, and said goodnight to Olivia. She looked surprised, asked if I was okay. I told her I'd let myself out. Walking home under the streetlights, I replayed every moment, the smiles, the shared oars in the kayak, the casual way she'd introduced him as a cousin. I felt foolish for believing her when she said she'd never been in a serious relationship. I realized their revenge had turned into a spectacle and I had been the unwitting star. The next day, I passed their house and noticed a new photo on Olivia's front porch table, a framed shot of her and Daniel from their role-play night. He'd edited it to look like professional headshots, smiles locked in a perfect pose. The caption on her social feed read, "Playing house can be fun." My chest tightened. I snapped a quick photo and deleted it, not wanting to leave digital breadcrumbs. I haven't been back to the vinyl fair since. I still love flipping through soul records, but now I keep to myself in those crowded aisles. I deleted Olivia's number, uninstalled the kayak rental app we used, and swore off pop-up games and staged scenarios. I realized that honesty matters more than thrill. Now when someone asks if I've ever been in love, I answer truthfully, but I also ask for a little proof before trusting their story. Because trust isn't just about words, it's about what's left unsaid. And sometimes the biggest lies are saved for last. I was halfway through scrolling memes when Andrew's message popped up. "Want to catch a movie tonight?" It was a Friday, and I planned to binge that new sci-fi series, but something about his casual invite felt like an upgrade. He'd matched with me a few days earlier, his profile showing a quiet guy in graphic tees and a bookshelf behind him. His texts were thoughtful, never generic, "Hey," or "What are you doing?" So I wrapped my hoodie around me, grabbed my keys, and headed to the indie theater downtown. When I walked in, Andrew was already at the concession stand, debating popcorn flavors like it was a like choice. He waved me over, looking awkwardly charming in that I thought about this way. We grabbed the sweetest caramel popcorn they had, then slipped into the back row just before the trailer started. The lights dimmed, and I settled in, thinking this was a perfect low-key date. After the movie, we stepped into the cool night air. The neon marquee cast long shadows on the sidewalk. I asked him what he thought of the film's twist ending. He shook his head and said, "Let's talk about it over coffee." We ducked into a 24-hour diner across the street. We sat in a red vinyl booth, steam rising from mugs of black coffee, and dove into theories about multiverses and time loops. I felt that spark, the one you read about in those cheesy articles, only this felt real. Over the next week, Andrew and I texted constantly. He'd ask about my day, send me pictures of the pizza he was about to eat. He would share random band demos he was working on. He said he played guitar in a side project, but he never pushed to show me any recordings. I respected that, kept it mystery band energy. When he asked me to meet again, I said yes without hesitation. Our second date was at an outdoor arcade that turned into a mini carnival on weekends. We played skee-ball, tried to win stuffed toys, and shared a corn dog that dripped mustard on both our fingers. He laughed when I scored a perfect ring toss, then let me toss his beanbag once to boost his odds. I felt like I was in a rom-com scene, bright lights, silly games, and grinning like he owned the place. By date 3, I thought I knew him, quiet, creative, a bit shy, but with a spark when he smiled. So when he texted me at noon saying, "Got something to share, meet at my place at 8, I assumed it was a song he'd written or a painting. I showed up that night just after sunset. His apartment was cozy, tapestries on the walls, fairy lights tangled around a bookshelf, and a guitar leaning in the corner. He offered me tea and led me to the couch. Then he took a deep breath and said, "I've been waiting to ask you this in person." My heart skipped. He reached into his pocket and pulled out what looked like a tiny card. He flipped it over and held it up between us. It said, NFT Commerce 101, Private Artist Workshop. I frowned. He explained that he'd started an NFT business, and this was his pitch, the reason he'd matched on the app. He said he wanted to invest, and he thought I might be interested in joining him as a co-founder. He prepared a short speech and put it on cue cards. I blinked at the card in his hand. He cleared his throat and began reciting a rehearsed pitch, how blockchain could revolutionize digital art ownership, how early adopters stood to gain, and how my partner could share in the profits. He used the royal "we" when talking about our venture. He said I had the perfect eye for branding and that my design skills would be invaluable. I felt my chest tighten. He turned our date into a business meeting without warning. I set my tea down and asked him why he didn't mention this until now. He looked surprised, like he honestly thought it was a natural next step. He said he was passionate, and he didn't want to bury the lead. I felt speechless. I remembered our conversations about comics and old cartoons, the way he listened when I talked about my favorite authors. Now it felt like he'd been evaluating me as a potential investor rather than a date. I told him I needed a minute. He nodded and stepped into the kitchen to refill his cup. I thumbed through my phone, trying to find an exit strategy. When he came back, he handed me a printed slide deck titled "Your Role in Our Digital Renaissance." It had charts, projected earnings, and a timeline. I sighed and handed it back. I told him I didn't sign up for this. I signed up for movies and games and whatever was coming naturally. He looked crushed, closed his eyes, and said, "I thought you'd appreciate the honesty." I told him honesty is one thing, ambushing someone with a formal investment presentation on a couch is another. He ran a hand through his hair and said he just didn't want to keep secrets. I said I value transparency, but I also value context. He asked if I'd like to read the deck and get back to him. I shook my head and said, "I'll pass." I grabbed my bag and stood up. He reached out, but I stepped back. I said I appreciated his drive, but I didn't want my next relationship to come with quarterly reports. He nodded slowly, eyes glossy, and said he understood. I walked to the door, then paused. I told him this wasn't about the idea. I just didn't want dinner dates to feel like board meetings. He managed a sad smile and said, "Maybe we can just hang out sometime without agendas." I mumbled, "We'll see," and left into the night. Walking home, I thought about how easy it is to confuse ambition with authenticity. Andrew had been sincere. He believed in his project and wanted someone reliable by his side. But he'd forgotten to gauge whether I was looking for love or for a startup co-founder. I texted him the next morning, "Thanks for last night. I think our timelines just aren't aligned. Take care." His reply was understanding. "Good luck with everything." I felt a flicker of relief. A few days later, I passed a coworker who'd been dabbling in NFTs. I remembered Andrew's deck and how polished it was, but also how out of place it felt in a living room. I realized there's a time and place for pitches, pitch competitions, investor dinners, not first dates. I deleted the photos of us at the arcade from my phone and replaced them with screenshots of funny dog memes he'd sent. That felt more honest. Now, when someone asks me out, I check for cues. No cue cards, no slide decks. I want to be surprised by shared laughter, not by unexpected partnerships. I still keep my phone on silent at the movies and my hoodie for impromptu gigs. And if someone ever tries to pitch me again on a couch, I'll just nod politely, smile, and say, "Tell me more about that after dessert." I first noticed something was off when Sally suggested we hit that new fusion taco place on a Tuesday night. It was uncharacteristic. They usually save their adventures for weekends, but she said she wanted something spontaneous. I met her under the neon sign, the air thick with salsa music drifting from inside. She was wearing a yellow sundress and a grin that said she had a secret she couldn't wait to share. We ordered fish tacos and spicy margaritas, clinking glasses over the roar of a crowded bar. I thought we were off to a perfect start. Over the next few weeks, Sally and I fell into a comfortable routine. Thursdays were trivia nights at that dimly lit pub where she dazzled everyone with her encyclopedic knowledge of 80s rock lyrics. Saturdays were thrift store crawls, where she'd hunt for vintage concert tees while I rifled through old vinyl. Sundays were movie marathons at her apartment, where we'd build a blanket fort and debate whether speed ramping in films was clever or annoying. I thought I found someone who loved life's weird little quirks as much as I did. Then one afternoon, she invited me to help her pick out an outfit for an important meeting. I showed up at her place holding coffee and bagels, and she waved me inside, pointing at a rack of dresses and blouses laid out on her bed. She said the meeting was with her uncle's friends, very traditional folks who could fund her passion project. I helped her narrow down the choices while she rehearsed a pitch about her upcoming Date or Disgrace blog, something she said was just a hobby. I nodded and offered feedback, assuming she meant a fashion critique site or a little commentary. That evening, we drove to a private estate on the outskirts of town lit by tiki torches and draped in string lights. She led me past a spread of charcuterie boards and a champagne bar to a circle of well-dressed guests gathered around picnic tables. Sally introduced me as her guest, then launched into her presentation, only it wasn't about fashion. She pulled out her laptop, connected it to a projector, and displayed her blog's homepage. A roster of men she'd dated, complete with star ratings, restaurant choices, and a thumbs up or thumbs down verdict, tagged beside each photo. My jaw dropped. She clicked through slides showing me at the taco place, my favorites highlighted, next to reviews praising my solid beverage etiquette, but criticizing my timing of compliments. I felt heat rush to my face. She talked about her Date or Disgrace challenge, how she tested each guy's worthiness by scoring them on Ambient's appreciation, meal manners, and overall charm. The crowd laughed and nodded, taking notes on clipboards. Some asked her what rewards she offered the worthy ones. She said they got bonus coverage on her social channels. I squeezed my eyes shut, remembering every time she'd asked for my opinion on her writing or photography gear. I thought she wanted my advice as a friend. Instead, I was a case study. I caught her eye from the back of the crowd. She winked, clearly proud of her performance. I felt like a clown under a spotlight. After the slideshow, Sally announced a live demo. She'd randomly select one of us to join her on the blog live for commentary. She held up a fishbowl of folded slips, each a name. I sank further into the grass as she plunged her hand in. The slip she pulled had my name in bold. The audience cheered. She smiled wider than I'd ever seen. I stood voice tight and told her I needed air. She blinked, surprised, then mouthed, "Wait." I slipped away, the torchlight flickering on my retreating back, and found a path that led to a small gazebo overlooking a koi pond. I sank onto a bench and let the cool night air wash over me. My phone buzzed. One of her friends texting. Wasn't that epic? I shut it off. Sally found me moments later, leaning on the railing. She tried to explain it was all in good fun, that her readers loved the interactive elements. I asked if she even cared how I felt about being paraded in front of strangers. She said, of course, but also that the blog needed fresh content to keep her page ranking high. I felt tears prick my eyes, not for embarrassment alone, but for the loss of the person I thought she was. I told her I was done. She reached out to take my hand, but I pulled away and walked back toward the party. I passed the projector still humming, the charcuterie boards half eaten. Guests called after me, laughing about the ratings. I ignored them, hopped into my car, and drove away. The next day, I deleted the photos I'd taken with her. No more souvenirs of my ratings. I unsubscribed from her blog and told mutual friends I was stepping back. Some sympathized, others shrugged and said I should have known better than to trust a ratings site. I realized I'd been hungry for connection, so I ignored the signs, constant note-taking, secretive filming, offhand remarks about testing reactions. Lesson learned, I thought. Weeks later, I ran into Sally at the bookstore where we first bonded over Otis Redding. She greeted me with a hesitant smile. I said hello, but didn't stop. She said she missed hanging out, but I shook my head. She asked if she could talk, maybe explain more. I told her the only thing I wanted was to be treated like a person, not a blog post. She nodded, eyes sincere, but I knew I couldn't go back to being her next headline. I still love tacos and trivia nights, but now I go solo or with friends I've known for ages. I learned to guard my trust and to watch for people turning life into content before it's finished. Sometimes I think about Sally's wink under that torchlight, but mostly I'm glad I left before she could click publish. Now, when someone asks for feedback on their side project, I laugh and say, sure, but no public ratings, okay? Because I know that once you become data, it's hard to get your story back. I still remember the message like it was etched in neon. Want to grab drinks tonight? I'm bringing someone. That sounded weird even for a blind date, but Nathan's texts had been so charming. Funny anecdotes about his job, goofy jazz of dancing llamas, that I figured he had a quirky sense of humor. So I shrugged and said sure and met him at the brass rail, the corner bar with low lighting and better whiskey than most dive joints. When I walked in, Nathan was already at a high-top table near the back, waving at me with a kind of grin that made his eyes crinkle. Next to him sat a woman in a sharp blazer, clipboard in hand, looking like she belonged in a conference room rather than a bar. I paused in the doorway. He stood and introduced her as Dr. Ellis, his therapist, here to observe our interaction and help him manage trust issues. My chest tightened. I'd never been to a date that felt like an episode of a reality show. Trust me, I'm on counsel. I tried to shrug off the awkwardness. Dr. Ellis smiled and shook my hand with the polite firmness of someone used to evaluating people. Nathan ordered us all a round of craft beers and explained that his last couple of relationships ended badly because he couldn't read social cues, or so he discovered in therapy. He said having Dr. Ellis there would make sure he didn't accidentally push me away or misinterpret anything I said. I nodded, took a sip of pale ale, and wondered how he'd survived dates until now. We dove into conversation, talking about our favorite travel mishaps and the worst concerts we'd attended. Every time I paused to tell a story, Dr. Ellis jotted something down. When I laughed, she made a note. I felt like I was under a microscope, performance mode engaged, when all I wanted was to relax and be myself. Nathan kept asking me questions about my work and family, looking at me with genuine interest, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was auditioning. Halfway through our second round, I caught Dr. Ellis looking at Nathan, then back at her clipboard. She leaned over and quietly said to him, he seemed a bit guarded when you asked about his childhood. Maybe try a lighter topic. Nathan nodded, cleared his throat, and asked me about my favorite pizza topping instead. I appreciated the break from heavy stuff, but I also felt like I was bumping along in someone else's calibration. After that, Nathan seemed more relaxed. He told me about his cat's online popularity, an Instagram feed full of photos of a tuxedo cat in silly costumes. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my beer. Dr. Ellis scribbled something, then raised her glass and a little toast toward me. I clinked back, trying to remember that this was supposed to be about building trust, not building data points. When the bartender announced last call, Nathan suggested we step outside for some air. We moved into the alley behind the bar, where string lights hung overhead and the night air tasted like rain. He turned to me and apologized for the weird setup. He said he was serious about wanting a real connection, but needed a safety net until he learned new patterns. I told him I respected that, but I also value authenticity. If he needed Dr. Ellis, that was fine, but I hoped to eventually talk without an intermission. He smiled and tucked his hair behind his ear. Then Dr. Ellis joined us, closing her notebook and saying she'd let us have the rest of the evening to just talk. She pretended to check her watch and excused herself, walking back into the bar. Nathan gave me a relieved grin. I felt a knot in my chest loosen. We settled onto a bench by a painted mural and talked until the lights in the alley flickered off. That first real conversation felt electric. Without the clipboard hovering between us, we shared stories about our best friends, the books that changed our lives, and the time I accidentally got locked in a laundromat at 2 a.m. He laughed. I laughed. I sensed a genuine spark without interventions. When we finally said goodnight, he kissed my cheek softly and said, "Thanks for sticking around." I walked home feeling like I just had a second real date. But the next morning, a text popped up from Nathan. Dr. Ellis sent me her notes. "Want to grab lunch and see how we can align my improvements with your feedback?" I stared at my phone. Notes? Feedback? I felt the weight of her clipboard again. I realized that while I enjoyed our conversation without her, she was still a presence in his mind, rewriting every moment into therapy homework. I called him instead of texting. He answered on the first ring, sounding hopeful. I asked him if he would take a break from the therapy assignments and just hang out. He sighed, apologized, and said he didn't want to jeopardize his progress. I understood, but told him I worried the notes would overshadow whatever chemistry we had. He said he'd try to keep it casual, but I wasn't sure how long that would last. We met for lunch 2 days later at the taco stand where I liked my fish tacos spicy. Nathan arrived alone, no therapist in sight, looking sheepish. He admitted he'd told Dr. Ellis our date without giving details, and she'd interpreted it as a clinical session. He said he'd clarify that he wanted more organic experiences, and she agreed to step back. I felt a rush of relief. He asked if I'd still join him for a proper lunch date. I said yes. That afternoon felt like a breath of fresh air. No notebooks, no tips whispered in his ear. Just 2 people sharing tacos and arguing about the proper cheese to salsa ratio. We laughed at the sight of a dog begging at nearby tables and shared a churro for dessert. When we parted, I felt genuine excitement for the next time. Weeks passed without another mention of therapy notes. Nathan texted me 2 funny memes about cats in bow ties. I texted back laughing emojis. I realized he learned to trust himself on dates before asking Dr. Ellis for a play-by-play. Our connection grew stronger, built on spontaneous moments instead of interventions. One night, he surprised me at a local jazz club, 2 front-row seats waiting with my name on them. He bought tickets months ago, but never mentioned it until the last minute. I hugged him as the band started, caught up in the thrill of a real surprise. No third parties, no observations, just us. Eventually, he told me Dr. Ellis was proud of his progress. He said he still checked in with her sometimes, but learned he didn't need a chaperone to enjoy a date. I realized he'd turned a vulnerability into a strength, but he knew when to switch off the therapy mode. That took courage and trust. Now, when I think about that first night with the clipboard and the therapist, I smile at how far we've come. I respect anyone who works on themselves, but I also treasure moments unfiltered by agendas. Nathan found that balance, and I found that trust. And I know that the best dates don't need a third wheel, just 2 people ready to listen, laugh, and learn together. I still remember the thrill of finally matching with Isabel on a weekend dating app scroll. Her profile picture showed a warm smile, wind-tossed hair, and a stack of books in every shot. When she messaged me a witty comment about my favorite novel, I felt like someone had tapped me on the shoulder at a crowded party. We decided to meet for coffee at a tiny cafe that had turquoise walls and mismatched chairs. I walked in, saw her waving from a corner table, and felt that familiar spark of anticipation. Right away, Isabel made me feel at ease. She asked about my work in graphic design, and let me ask her about the novels she taught in her literature classes. We sat side by side on an upholstered bench, sipping our lats and laughing at each other's jokes. She told me about a novel she was writing in her journal and read me a snippet. A line so vivid I still quote it to myself when I need inspiration. I felt like I'd met someone whose mind matched mine, someone I could talk to about anything. After 2 weeks of coffee dates, bookstore trips, and a picnic in the park, Isabel surprised me by saying she deleted the dating app. I was thrilled. She said she was ready to go exclusive. No more swiping, no more games. We decided to spend our third Saturday together at a cooking class, learning to make fresh pasta from scratch. She dusted flour off her nose and insisted I try her first fettuccine ribbons. When I laughed and told her I was impressed, she brushed her hair back and said it was all part of her experiment. Experiment struck me as odd, but I brushed it off. Maybe she meant she was seeing how we worked together in the kitchen. She had a sparkle in her eye when she whisked eggs for the dough. We ended the class by sharing dinner in the studio's dining room, plates piled high and wine glasses clinking. I felt like I was falling for her, convinced I'd finally found someone genuine and steady. A week later, she invited me to her apartment for dinner. I knocked. She opened the door wearing a homemade apron, and the place smelled of garlic and rosemary. We cooked risotto and talked about our childhoods. I mentioned my first car, a hand-me-down hatchback that always stalled on hills. She leaned in, listened, and then told me she'd done something bold. She deleted her app account the moment I walked through that cafe door. I smiled and said I felt the same. We clinked glasses and kissed for the first time under her kitchen's warm light. That night, I fell asleep dreaming of weekend road trips. When I woke up, my phone buzzed with a TikTok notification. I frowned. It wasn't my style to scroll in bed. It was a video from Isabel's account. Confused, I tapped it open and saw the title. Exclusive Love Challenge. Make him hit delete. My heart pounded as a clip played. There I was, sipping coffee at our cafe date, laughing at her pasta experiment, even kissing her by the stove. The footage was hers, video after video, stitched together with emojis and captions. She posted it to her followers to show how easy it was to hook a guy into deleting his dating app. I felt nauseous. I trusted her, believing she was as invested in us as I was. Instead, I was content for her content. I texted her, "We need to talk." Her reply came almost instantly. "I know. Can you come over?" I drove across town, heart racing. When I knocked, she opened the door in sweatpants, looking contrite. She said the series was supposed to be private, an experiment for her friends who dared each other to date fly, date drop. She said she never meant for it to go public so quickly. I stepped inside, saw her phone on the counter with the video still playing, comments rolling and praising her social experiment. I asked how many views she'd gotten. She looked down and said the count was over 50,000. I felt every word I'd spoken to her had turned into bait for strangers' amusement. She apologized, said she'd delete the videos and passwords, but that her followers might have downloaded them already. I took a breath and asked how she could do this to someone she cared about. She said she'd gotten carried away, that the thrill of the clicks had clouded her judgment. She reached for my hand, but I pulled back. I told her it wasn't just the videos. It was how quickly she turned personal moments into public fodder. She nodded, tears in her eyes, begging me to stay. I walked to her living room window, looked out at the street below, and thought about trust and authenticity. I remembered her reading that journal snippet, how I believed she was sharing it with me alone. I realized I couldn't find that spark again under the glare of video cameras. I turned back and said I needed space, that I deserved someone who valued privacy over performance. She nodded again, defeated. I gathered my jacket and left without looking back. The elevator ride down felt like a release from a contract I hadn't signed. Outside, the night air smelled of rain and possibility. I locked my phone and deleted her number. I uninstalled TikTok for a while, forcing myself to remember the difference between genuine connection and staged moments for likes. Days later, I ran into a friend who asked if I heard from Isabel. I said no, and she gave me a sympathetic look. "She's always so creative," my friend said, "just maybe not with her boundaries." I nodded. I still loved cooking classes and coffee shops, but I was wary now. Trust had to be earned, not uploaded to the internet. I told myself I'd give dating another chance, one person at a time, face to face with no cameras between us. Because the best stories aren't the ones you broadcast, they're the ones you live. I saw it on a random Sunday afternoon, scrolling through my feed while I should have been studying for finals. The thumbnail jumped out at me, big block letters saying, "Dating a Feminist." I lasted 7 days, and a grinning face I recognized instantly. My heart weirdly skipped before I tapped play. There I was in clips from our dates, at that vegan food truck, sipping kombucha, at the campus art show, eyes wide at that neon sculpture. Even from our last coffee catch-up at the library cafe, me laughing at his jokes. He'd stitched it all together, blurred my voice slightly, and thrown a punchline here and there, mocking everything I said. The title hit me like cold water. I was part of some lame stunt for his channel. It started 4 weeks earlier. Daniel's profile popped up with a photo of him lounging under a palm tree, wearing aviator sunglasses and a shirt that said "No Filter." His bio mentioned local politics and a sweet spot for feminist podcasts. I was intrigued. Here was a guy who seemed to actually care about issues I cared about. We matched over our shared love for late-night tacos and critical theory, and our first message exchange was more than the usual, "Hey, what's up?" He quoted Otter Lord. I was sold. We met at Luna's Tacos, that neon-lit trailer on the edge of campus that does jackfruit tacos so good you forget the meat. He was already there when I arrived, leaning on the counter, 2 soft tacos in hand. He greeted me with an easy smile and an offer of his last fish taco, which I politely refused even though I was curious. We sat on picnic benches under string lights, trading stories about bad roommates and childhood crushes. He laughed at my anecdote about accidentally sending my thesis draft to my thesis advisor. I laughed too. It felt real. Date number 2 took us to the campus art gallery, an open house for local artists. I dragged him to a performance piece where a guy played a saw with a violin bow. He described it as auditory abstract expressionism. He accepted it with surprising grace. We strolled past sculptural installations made of steel and glass, talking about what art means in a world that likes things easy to consume. Afterwards, we grabbed kombucha at the cafe booth and sat among painting easels stacked in corners. I told him the first time I heard bell hooks, I felt like someone handed me a flashlight in a dark room. He nodded, eyes serious. By date 3, we were comfortable. He invited me to his apartment for dinner, home-cooked lasagna and green salad. His place smelled like oregano and old vinyl since he collected vinyls and played classic rock records softly in the background. He'd slipped some feminist zines between his record covers so I could browse while the lasagna baked. I felt seen. Someone cared about my passions, shared my playlists, even wanted to know which zines I recommended. We ate, talked late into the night, and ended with a soft goodnight hug that made my cheeks burn. Then came date 4. Coffee at the old library cafe before a campus debate on free speech. We both planned to attend, so he suggested grabbing the cappuccino first. I arrived to find him nursing a flat white, scribbling notes on his tablet. I sat down, and he launched into questions about my stance on safe spaces. I answered honestly, safe spaces can foster community without silence. He nodded, then smiled and closed his tablet with a snap. "Great chat," he said. "See you inside." I followed him through the arched doorway, ready for the debate, feeling like he really valued my opinion. I didn't realize his tablet was rolling video until I saw the YouTube link. He recorded our conversations as field material for his upcoming satirical commentary. The video cut between clips of me making a serious point and nodding attentively, then him replaying my words with a snarky inflection, as if I were a stand-up comedian. The comment section was a circus of mockery. She really thought safe spaces were about kindness. Got destroyed by college loser. Feminist meltdown in 3, 2, 1. My stomach churned. All that genuine exchange reduced to mean fodder. I closed the tab, hands trembling. My phone buzzed. Daniel. "Hey, did you catch the video?" Funny, right? I froze. He saw it. I texted back, "Is this supposed to be funny?" He replied, "It's satire, babe. You gotta laugh at yourself." I stared at the screen. Satire. This was baiting me for clicks. I felt baited, used. I called him immediately. He picked up after 2 rings, casual as ever. "What's up?" My voice cracked when I asked, "What is this?" He laughed softly, said he was building his channel, and I was a great co-host, even if unwitting. He offered to take it down if I felt hurt. I drove to his apartment in a daze, replaying moments I thought were sincere. At his door, he greeted me with a sheepish grin and an open laptop on the coffee table. The video was paused at my mid-sentence frown. He apologized, said he shouldn't have blurred my voice or used my image. I asked why he recorded me at all. He shrugged. Content is king. Authenticity sells. I felt that phrase echo inside me like an insult. Inside, his apartment looked the same, zines on the couch, vinyls on the shelf, but none of it mattered. I realized I was part of his content pipeline, not his connection pipeline. I told him I needed him to explain why he thought that was okay. He said it was all in the name of social critique, that he was making a point about extremist campus culture. I pointed out that he'd made me a punchline instead of a partner. He said he'd remove the video by morning and issue an apology. I nodded, uncertain if I trusted his word. Back home that night, I tossed and turned. I thought of his grin under the neon lights at Luma's, of the way he listened to my favorite podcasts, of the hug that felt warm. Were those real or just good angles? I checked his channel at dawn. The video was gone, replaced by another titled Hot Takes, dating a campus activist. Comments were already raging. He'd simply moved the clips over. My phone buzzed. Sorry to vid. It's more general. I realized the apology was just spin management. I texted him. I can't do this. He called immediately, voice frantic. Please, let's talk. I didn't pick up. Instead, I packed my bag and headed to a coffee shop I hadn't visited with him. I ordered a latte and sat at a window. As steam rose, I imagined the real me, unblurred, unedited, not a script for someone else's show. I deleted his number and the dating app. I saved my favorite podcast app from that first date and played it on repeat, reminding myself that authenticity isn't a meme. Later that week, I saw him across the quad, waving. I looked away. I realized some connections aren't worth salvaging when trust is a one-way ticket. I returned to my textbooks and side projects, hosting a small feminist reading group instead of chasing awkward thumbnails. And when someone asks me if I've ever been mocked for clicks, I just smile, sip my latte, and say, not anymore. I never expected a simple swipe to land me at what felt like a weekend gig for amateur sleuths, but that's exactly how it went down. I matched with Ethan on a Thursday evening. His profile bragged about board games, true crime podcasts, and a penchant for mystery novels. His first message was a pun about Sherlock Holmes, and I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my phone. We chatted about our favorite would-do-mits until he suggested meeting up at a special event on Saturday. I pictured a cozy cafe game night, so I said yes. Saturday arrived with perfect autumn weather, crisp air, leaves crunching underfoot. Ethan met me outside the Gilded Goose, a Victorian-style pub that looked straight out of a period drama. He was easy to spot in his tweed jacket and matching cap, carrying a parcel wrapped in brown paper. He greeted me with that same friendly grin from his profile pictures and handed me a sealed envelope. Welcome to the Midnight Parlor, it read inside, an invitation to a murder mystery dinner, courtesy of a pop-up immersive theater troupe he discovered. I was intrigued. Inside the pub was transformed, low lighting, candles flickering on every table, actors in Edwardian costumes mingling with guests. We took seats at a long banquet table under a grand chandelier. A waiter in a crisp vest poured us wine as an actor playing a butler stepped forward and explained the evening's game. Someone at the table would meet their end, and we had to solve the murder using clues sprinkled throughout the night. Ethan nudged me excitedly, handed me a notepad, and whispered I'd lie for this stuff. The dinner unfolded like a dream. First course arrived, cream of mushroom soup served in quaint porcelain bowls, followed by the butler's dramatic announcement that Lord Pembroke had been found dead in the library. A projector flickered to life, showing a grainy portrait of a stiff figure in a velvet coat. The actors reassumed their roles around us, Lady Agatha clutching lace gloves, Colonel Brown polishing a monocle, Miss Violet fanning herself theatrically. We scribbled notes on mannerisms and overheard whispered alibis. Between courses, Ethan and I compared theories. I thought the Colonel's limp was fake, a ploy to explain blood at the scene. Ethan argued it was genuine, pointing out how the Colonel always avoided putting weight on one foot. We bickered playfully, jotting down accusations in the margins of our menus. Around us, other guests leaned in, forming alliances and trading whispered theories. Just as dessert plates clinked down, slices of rich chocolate torte drizzled with raspberry coulis, a real panic rippled through the room. The lights snapped off, plunging us into darkness. The butler's pre-recorded voice crackled over hidden speakers. The game has changed. This is no longer a performance. Guests gasped as spotlights snapped on his announcement. One among you is the true culprit. An actor wearing formal attire. Someone I thought was part of the troupe stepped forward, handcuffs glinting. He pointed at a guest 2 seats down. Detective agency has alerted us. A real crime has taken place. The woman he accused looked stunned. Ethan grabbed my arm. This can't be part of the show, right? I shook my head, heart pounding. The actor turned officer read a short statement about a theft that had occurred at a gallery 2 nights ago. An original painting stolen from behind glass. He said that gallery security had traced a painting's unique security tag to one of our coats, and they needed to question anyone who might have handled it. My stomach dropped. The room felt too quiet, actors frozen in shocked poses. The full but not-so-fast detective asked everyone to stay put while uniformed officers arrived. Ethan leaned across the table, eyes wide. "This isn't part of the mystery, is it?" I pulled out my phone and saw live news alerts. Victorian-themed event turns real crime scene. Ethan looked around, realization dawning that we'd all been unwitting accomplices in someone else's twist. Actors stepped back into character, some in plain clothes pulling out badges. They calmly asked us to hand over coats and purses, which we did, breathless. I watched as they inspected every item. My coat pocket was empty, no painting tag. I felt frantic relief until Ethan's coat came out clear too. The investigators thanked the group for patience, then escorted the accused guest to a nearby office for questioning. It turned out her scarf had swept over the painting's display case, accidentally triggering the silent alarm. The painting itself hadn't vanished, it was simply dislodged, recovered in the confusion. Apparently, an overzealous partygoer mistook it for a prop and tucked it under their arm before realizing their mistake. As they wrapped up and we collected our belongings, the organizers apologized profusely. Ethan and I found a quiet corner at the bar, shaken but safe. He ran a hand through his hair, eyes still wide. "That was insane," he said. I nodded, still processing. I thought immersion meant pretend murders, not actual investigations. He shrugged, laughing nervously, and ordered us another round of wine on the house. When we finally left the pub under the late-night sky, our breath misting in the cool air, Ethan cracked a joke about adding accidental art smuggler to his resume. I laughed till my chest still felt tight. We walked to a nearby park bench and sat, watching distant traffic lights wink red and green. He turned to me and said, "I'm sorry you got dragged into that." I shook my head. "At least it wasn't boring," I said. We toasted with strawberry mint cocktails from a tucked-away kiosk. By the time I got home, my mind buzzed with the night's chaos. I deleted my calendar's murder mystery dinner reminder and texted Ethan. "We survived a real crime scene. Want to grab coffee tomorrow?" He replied immediately, "Absolutely," with the lights on. The next day, we met at a sunlit cafe where we laughed about our clumsy detective moves. The way Colonel Brown kept polishing his fake monocle. I marveled that a swipe had led to a night that blended fiction and reality so seamlessly. Weeks later, the story made local headlines. How an interactive theater night turned into a genuine false alarm. Interviewers called participants amateur sleuths who unwittingly aided the investigation. I saw photos of myself and Ethan scanning clues under candlelight. I realized how thin the line can be between stage drama and real life. I kept in touch with Ethan, of course. We bonded over conspiracies and who knows what's next scenarios. But now when someone suggests a themed event, I always ask, are there going to be actual cops? Because sometimes murder mysteries are just that, actual mysteries. And sometimes the best partnerships aren't forged over coffee, but over complete, soul-shaking chaos under a gilded goose chandelier. I matched with Maya on a Wednesday afternoon when I was supposed to be finishing a report, but her profile pic stopped me cold. She was sitting on a rooftop at sunset, the city skyline behind her, holding a champagne flute and grinning like she'd just won the lottery. Her bio said she was into travel, interior design, and building teams of empowered individuals. I figured building teams was some cheesy attempt at sounding entrepreneurial, but I was intrigued, so I hit like. She messaged me 20 minutes later, "Hey, want to check out my favorite coffee shop tonight?" I showed up at Beans and Vinyl just after 8, nerves jingling like guitar strings. Maya was already there, tucked into a corner booth with 2 lats in front of her. She gave me a hug like she'd known me forever, then handed me a latte with a heart in the foam. We talked about my day and her design projects, and by the time we ordered another round, I thought I hit conversational gold. This felt like a real connection. A week later, she invited me to brunch at the Loft on Sunday. I arrived thinking we'd have avocado toast and matching pajamas or something equally laid back, but the loft turned out to be a converted warehouse with crystal chandeliers and white linen tablecloths. I felt overdressed in my jeans and a button down, but Maya waved me over like everything was perfect. She told me it was a meeting of her new venture team, and that I was her guest. I blinked, expecting maybe a few friends, but the room was full of women in business casual, all clutching notebooks and pens. She introduced me as her potential partner, which made my stomach twist. My smile probably looked too forced, but I nodded while she passed me a branded folder. Inside was a welcome packet for Lumiere Candles, a luxury-scented wax company she'd recently joined. I flipped through glossy pages showing their best-selling Parisian vanilla and seaside sage, each candle positioned like jewelry in a display case. Maya told me she was excited to help me achieve financial freedom alongside her. I laughed nervously and whispered I thought this was brunch, but one of her teammates patted my hand and said, "Stay loose, we'll handle the pitch." The host, a woman named Claire, stood up and dimmed the lights. A giant screen lit up with the Lumiere logo, and Claire launched into a presentation called Ignite Your Income. She talked about commissions, downlines, and exclusive product drops. Every time Maya caught my eye, she mouthed, "You'll love this." I felt like I'd been swept into someone else's TD talk, except it was all about selling scented wax and pyramid tiers. I toyed with the idea of sneaking out, but I didn't want to embarrass Maya in front of her team. By the end, they passed around sample jars of Citrus Grove candle wax and set up ordering forms. Maya pulled me aside, beaming, and said she pre-filled my form for a starter kit worth £300. "Trust me," she whispered. "This is the ticket to living the life you deserve." I stared at the form with fields for debit details and downline targets. I mumbled something about needing to think, but Maya gave me puppy eyes and said, "We start next week. Potluck at my flat." Before I could protest, she linked her calendar with mine and RSP'd me. The next 3 days were a blur of text reminders. "Don't forget your token candles. Team meeting tomorrow, dress business casual. So excited to work with you." Every ping made my chest tighten. I kept trying to back out, but we'd matched schedules so tightly I didn't know how. Finally, I sent a text. "Hey Maya, I'm really not up for this. I thought we were dating, not selling candles." She replied instantly, "Don't worry, after one success morning call you'll see how fun it is." And she forwarded a Zoom link. I joined the call expecting a casual catch-up. Instead, I saw 30 faces in low boxes, all smiling and waving. A speaker jumped in, hyped us up, talked about duplication strategy and 500-pound club. They celebrated someone hitting a 1,000-pound month, complete with confetti GIS. I bit my lip, feeling like a ghost on a stage I never auditioned for. Maya waved at me, whispering, "See, you're part of something bigger." I wanted out more than ever. That evening, I took a long walk to clear my head, texting Maya, "I'm not comfortable with all this. Let's do something just the two of us." No reply. I got home and found 10 missed calls and a group chat invite. The chat was full of excited messages. "We're on fire. Get ready for our retreat." I felt nauseous. I deleted the chat, blocked the group, then texted Maya, "I'll see you Friday, but only for dinner." She shot back, perfect, as if nothing had happened. Friday night, I showed up at her flat. She greeted me with a hug and a kiss on the cheek, then asked if I had my tablet for the new product preview. My heart sank. I said, "Can we just eat and talk?" She looked hurt and set the tablet aside, but I saw it flash back on her nightstand for the rest of the evening. We ate takeout curry, and I told her I liked our first dates better when we talked about books and music. She said this was my chance to invest in myself. I shook my head and said, "I don't want a company, I want you." She looked at me, confusion flickering, and asked what that meant. I stood up and said I was done, with the candles, the calls, and maybe with us. She didn't argue, just nodded, that same uncertain look I'd seen when I tried to step back. Walking home, I realized how quickly I'd been hustled. I thought I was finding someone genuine, only to discover I was a customer, not a catch. I deleted my account in NLM Portal and logged out of our shared calendars. A week later, Maya texted, "Can we talk?" I didn't reply. I still think about our rooftop coffee date, the way she laughed at my worst college stories, the moment I felt like maybe I had found someone real. But sometimes you have to let a match burn out before you know if it was lighting up your life, or just lighting candles in someone else's empire.